The huge white moon reflected the light of the sun into the dark night sky shrouded in clouds, making it clear about something terrible and unexpected. In the unknown expanse of the thicket in various mountains, a certain explosion is heard and seen, which illuminated with white light the dark part of the expanse, empty of forest and mountains. A strange-looking young man with horns, one of which had been torn off, jumped out of the curtain of rising dust, and cuts and wounds were visible on his blue robes. The guy ran away from that cloud of dust, as if fleeing from something, with a furious expression on his face, showing that he was clearly not happy with the turn of events in which he found himself. As it turns out, behind the guy running away is something with many scarlet eyes, which is 3 times larger than him and somewhat resembles a huge, distorted, white lion. The guy with the remaining horn takes strength into his fist and his sharp blue claws begin to shine while he takes a deep breath in order to apparently concentrate on the blow. The monster swings, making a blow, but the guy at great speed, literally like a bullet, pierces the palm of a huge 4-armed monster, and jumps off the rock, rushing upward. Having soared so high that his silhouette was visible against the background of the large moon, as if a hero with a scarf fluttering in the wind was flying again at his opponent in the face of a monster. His eyes glow with the desire to win this battle, and from his lips you can hear a cry into which the guy put his soul and all his determination, since apparently he has something to fight for and he intends to return. Having landed on the body of an unknown beast, the guy begins to shower it with a hail of cutting attacks, and literally swipe it as if he intends to make some kind of dish out of it. Naturally, this situation does not suit the monster and he clearly tenses up and growls at his opponent, standing in a block from all the cutting attacks that continue to rain down on him in a flurry. Opening its huge and disproportionate mouth with huge sharp teeth, the monster strikes with its huge tongue and, unfortunately, the blow reaches its target and injures the guy. From such a serious blow, the guy, who seemed to have already taken the situation into his own hands, flies away from the enemy with terrible force, throwing his head back and at the same time bleeding profusely. Having flown a certain distance, the flight ends with a fall into the bushes, which soften the wounds rather than on a rock, but still not completely and not so much that his rib will take and grow together. While the guy is hanging head down and blood is coming out of his head, which has already flowed into his eye, turning it red, he does not give up and the desire to win and anger are visible in his eyes. Even though the monster was wounded, it made him angrier, and in an instant he found himself right next to the tree where the guy landed after a long flight, and all 5 eyes of the monster looked at him with rage. The monster swings in order to deliver a blow that will be fatal for the unknown, but despite his wounds, he quickly parries it and makes a tackle away from the beast. Landing on his feet after a competent dodge, near the paws of the beast, the guy prepares to perform a jump while his horns glow blue. He is at the limit of his capabilities, but does not give up. With a sharp jerk, the guy's claws, with the help of his unique abilities, cut the monster's leg like a razor, making a deep cut in it that will certainly not heal so easily. Making numerous jerks after one cut, the guy delivers several more precise cutting blows, chopping the beast's legs like butter, making him unable to stand and in a hurry to fall. After such well-calibrated blows and jerks, the monster, already without parts of its legs, begins to fall, unable to do anything due to the wounds received, until the guy loses time. With another jerk, he finds himself behind the beast and stretches out his hand with claws to him to finally end their battle, but even so the monster sees him. The blows that the unknown guy inflicts cause the beast's blood to gushing in different directions, painting that canyon in a dark scarlet color, causing more and more damage to the monster's body. With eyes burning with rage and teeth clenched, the guy made swing after swing and stuck his sharp claws surrounded by a blue aura into the beast. But after the monster was completely weakened, the guy put the beast in a chokehold, which obviously broke several bones, if there were any, and it was already obvious that the monster was powerless and raised his hands. The guy squeezes the neck of the beast who wants to take his life, but in this they are similar, they want to take each other's lives, and the guy puts everything on the line, from life to something else. The unknown man utters a heartbreaking scream, which shows how he is trying to defeat the enemy, and he is clearly squeezing out all the strength from himself, all to the last drop. And yet, after some time, with the guy's enormous efforts, the monster's head goes flying, leaving the body below. All the effort was not wasted, the guy won. The flying head splashes blood, while the body on which the guy is sitting falls lifelessly, showing that without a head, the monster, fortunately, will not go far. The guy sits with a blank look looking at the body that he just left without a head, while he tries to regain his breath. You can see how the head finally lands with a characteristic blow. Finally relaxing a little, his gaze clears a little, and now the most important thing is to regain his breath while his face is covered in blood and only one eye is open. But some strange sound is heard, and it attracts the guy's attention, and he turns his gaze filled with rage, greedily gasping for air, and his wounds only increase. Sitting on the headless body of the beast, he sees several more individuals approaching him, which means one thing: if it was so hard for him with one, then there is no chance. For individuals have already approached the wounded and weakened guy almost point blank, looking at him with their strangely located eyes, while several more are gradually approaching. In their eyes you can see rage, hunger, and a real brutal nature, as if a predator is looking at prey driven into a corner, but unfortunately it is so, the guy can do nothing. And the unknown guy understands his situation, and from his look it is clear that he wants to fight and wants to fight for his life, but his wounds will not allow this. His bright yellow eyes, their gaze is filled with regret and the desire to fight, but he simply cannot, because his strength is not enough to defeat all those creatures in front of him. Probably in the last seconds of his life, the guy asks for forgiveness from someone under the name Lart, while apparently a blow is flying at him that will end his life. Suddenly, the events are transferred to another guy who woke up with tears in his eyes, shouting something about his brother, holding onto the blanket. Apparently he is the Lart that the unknown person was talking about. This guy's name is Lart. He slept on some kind of mattress made of straw, and his restroom looked more like a barn for cattle, and he was in rags. Wiping his tears, the guy thinks out loud that he had a dream with his brother, who sailed to the continent of nature, and there he should be happy, for like 10 years. He touches a strange growth on his head that looks like a bone. Apparently he should also have horns, like his brother, but so far they are not visible at all. Looking in the mirror, Lart says that he got a bump on his small horn, poking it with his finger and checking the extent of the damage, so to speak, but why are his horns so small? But the guy's mood changes and thinks that he is a non-entity, not like a brother who has every chance of becoming some kind of divine master, apparently all because of the horns that do not grow on his head. They start knocking on the door heartrendingly and breaking in every possible way, which of course frightened Lart and brought him out of his state of thinking about what a non-entity he is. A hand with red claws sticks through the small window in the door and throws a plate with green balls on the ground. The living conditions are like in a prison. Is Lart really a prisoner? A voice from behind the door shouts to Lart to quickly eat his food and to leave immediately as he has a lot of work to do today, which makes it clear that Lart is more of a slave than a prisoner. Leaning on a column, Lart began to happily devour the food offered to him, albeit a very strange one, as if he had a choice whether to eat it or not. The boy remembers how his brother warned his little one not to skip meals, because it is very important and you need to eat as much as possible. And he continued to say that he and Lart are one of the few representatives of the natural faction that survived due to natural energy and they are getters. Looking at his brother, Lart beamed with happiness and completely believed every word, and listened as his brother warned that they could not let the spark of prosperity go out. But the calm breakfast is interrupted by a sudden kick in the face from a red-haired man from whom the rest of the food was on the floor, and the man was clearly angry with Lart. A man named Volgo shouts at a guy holding his cheek that he's deaf or what. They were told to immediately go to work while Lart asked for forgiveness. Turning away and walking through the doorway, the man says how disgusting he is with the natural smell and being in this position in general, but says the task is for Lart. Island of Predators, Lart is seen in a large field in which he has to collect all the crops and dig holes, but for now, the guy is dragging a cart for the entire crop to its place. A typical day is visible for Lart as a slave, excavations under supervision in the third sector, where the boy skillfully wields a pickaxe and digs lower and lower, doing the work. Next on the schedule is the extraction of black ore in the depths of the dark and dangerous caves of the island on which he is kept and forced to work literally for food and lodging. Well, then, according to the schedule, work on the graphite plains, where Lart is already operating a rake for sowing various vegetables and other crops of this world. Lart constantly works with a beaming face as if all this work is nonsense, as if accepting all this hard work is his destiny, swinging a rake. This is quite cruel for 15-year-old Lart, but from his thoughts and work, he is distracted by a pebble that hits his head and hits the horn on which there was a bump. It turns out that these are children. Classic children have always been the most cruel, and these mock Lart, telling him to work normally and earn his quota for his food. Holding the bruised horn, the blood on his face is visible from the damage these upstarts inflicted, but the boy silently follows them with his gaze, looking in bewilderment. But even from them he asks for forgiveness, and again listens to mockery only because he smells like the natural faction, which is clearly not pleasant for those kids, leaving calling him an idiot. Without having time to talk about next time and the like, the main upstart stumbles upon someone whom his henchmen have already noticed, but did not have time to say. In front of them stood an important man whom they called the general, and apparently he himself was not very happy to see this little thing in this place, and the little thing was not very happy to see the general. The general makes a remark that they are aimlessly wandering around the territory that is forbidden for children, disobeying what they were told to do. Having shouted for the little ones to go to school, they immediately tucked their tails between their legs and immediately began to run, their heels sparkling while the general shouted after them. Clearing his throat, the man turned his gaze to Lart working in the field, putting his hand to his chin. His gaze was not as rude and cruel as with those children. Muchina called Lart by name, which attracted attention and distracted him a little from working with a rake in the graphite clearing, which he was ordered to do, but he was still in charge. Having bowed, he shouted and greeted the general as befits, and he called him over, offering to take something from him, which looks a little strange and suspicious, because no one cares about Lart. The boy catches a small bag with something inside, dropping the rake because of this, which will still need to be worked across the entire plain and further. Lart casts a sidelong glance at the general for such an unexpected offering for a slave, which is very strange and suspicious on his part, since he is the boss in this place. But the general waves to the boy with an incredibly kind and sweet face, saying that he took some from the food warehouse so that he could have a snack, since at his age this is very important for growth. Lart bows deeply as a sign of gratitude for such a generous gift and thanks, to which he receives gratitude for his work in return, and words of faith in him. And they believe in him precisely in the sense that he will become a divine carrier, which is why the guy's stuffed mouth stops absorbing food from what he heard and Lart himself becomes a little dumb. Imagining how beautiful his horns will be, he dreams of them just being, but with his mouth full he thinks about the words of the general, thinking about all the best. While pronouncing the letters, with his mouth full, Lart thanks the general, saying that he will become a divine bearer, to which he receives a recommendation to first experience food. The general's name is Alec, and even though he is from a completely different faction, he is very kind, and thanks to his kindness, the stay on the island of carnivores becomes much easier. Waving goodbye and smiling at the kind general, Lart dreams of becoming as kind as him and even gives himself something like a word that he will definitely become as kind. Time has flown by, and you can already see the sunset and how many birds also go to their nests in order to bring prey and relax after a working day, well, if you can call it that. Lart looks at the beautiful sunset and the landscapes opening from the clearing, the ocean that does not end on the horizon, the mountains and many houses going down the slope. Out of breath from such a difficult day, he looks at the beauty of nature, until his caretaker comes behind him, drunk into a rag and muttering something under his breath as he goes down the stairs. Saying out loud that he needs to clean up the meeting room, and he's drunk as hell, he thinks about how to get out of this situation and what clever thing he can come up with. His attention falls on Lart, who is looking at the sunset, thinking that he is a member of the carnivorous faction, so why should he get out if there is such a worker? He asks if Lart has finished his work, to which he receives confirmation, and continues saying that he will give the keys to the hall and he needs to clean it up. But the boy objects, because he is strictly forbidden to go there and he is worried about the consequences of such actions, which certainly will not be positive. The guy's words quite infuriated the man watching him, and he thought that they were looking at him from above, saying such things, which confirmed that he was not sober. Fearing an unnecessary fight, Lart agrees, to which he receives no gratitude, but only a warning that he needs to finish early, until the big shots, or old men, arrive. The guy is very tired and wants to quickly finish this bad job so he can go and finally rest, so he is, so to speak, motivated. Half an hour later, Lart did it with a bang. The whole hall sparkled and shone as if it had just been bought and installed, which even the young man himself notices. You can't praise yourself correctly, no one will praise you. Looking at the bookshelf, Lart is surprised by the number of books on display and thinks about what kind of books they are, until his gaze falls on one entertaining book. The book had the horns of the natural faction drawn on it, and Lart didn't understand what such a book should do in such a place, and naturally he was curious about what was in it. However, laughter and footsteps are heard from the corridor, and the guy was confused because he didn't expect that he wouldn't make it in time for the leaders to arrive, thinking about what he should do now in such a situation. The boy begins to shake, because if he is burned, then he will be punished until the very end of his life, and then all hell breaks loose and he is doomed, while conversations outside the door could be heard getting closer and closer. Thinking about how they will starve him and force him to work like cattle, using whips so that he does not shirk, he is simply afraid. Quickly examining the entire location for a possible place to hide, Lart realizes that he cannot allow him to be captured and looks for a place. A few moments later, a man with sharp horns enters the office and, with a rather plump physique, laughs at the conversations they had on the way to the hall. The man also notices one smell, which he puts emphasis on, and apparently this is the very smell of the natural fraction that everyone was talking about. Lart, who was sitting in some place, tensed up quite a bit and thought that that's it. Apparently he would have to work without food for 50 hours straight and say goodbye to life and all that. But the man says that the room smells like a first-class bar and that it has not been so clean and beautiful here for a long time, which the men behind also noticed. As things turned out, Lart exhaled and heard conversations where the men said that the same person would continue to clean, that is, Lart would continue to clean. Lart just prays that he won't be caught in the closet, while the man is talking about the bastard from the natural faction, that is, the boy who is in their hall. But so far the men do not know what to do with him, since he has not become a divine carrier, that is, the horns have not grown, which makes Lart shocked and does not understand what they are talking about. One of the men is disappointed that the horns have not grown and calls the young man a waste, until he realizes that now he is overhearing such a thing with horror on his face. The men discuss that the ore is lethal for them and that the children should be given care so that nothing terrible happens, because this is why Lart is forced to work. With a grin on his face, the general offers to eat this. The other man understands what he means and agrees to such a strange and incomprehensible proposal. Lart also doesn't understand what they are talking about. The men are talking about some kind of liquor, which makes the guy peer harder into the crack of the closet door. Having taken a jar of liquor from the horn of a natural getter, the liquor turned out to be made from the same missing horn of brother Lart. Now everything becomes clearer. Lart's brother's name was Larch, and they do not talk about him in the best light, until the young man understands what was done to his brother, and he does not live quietly and peacefully, but has been dead for 10 years. From a small glass with a nasty smile, men drink liquor from Larch's horn and are in awe of its deliciousness, glad that they have such a swill. And the general finally shows his true colors, and with the statement that the young man thinks that he is good, makes the men laugh to tears, continuing to drink alcohol. The man says that Lart would not have thought so in even the wildest fantasy if he knew the whole truth about him and their actions on this carnivore island. After all, it's been 10 years since his older brother Larch went to the continent of nature as was promised for their hard work and work on their farms and fields. But he was simply fed as an offering to the very animals called predators, to whom Larch was simply thrown away as waste. Hearing all the words spoken by the general, Lart was beside himself with shock and rage that intertwined together and became a whole, because he had no choice but to listen. The black ore that the guy mines is visible, and it looks like something like a black crystal emitting a purple glow rather than metal. And the general also says that if anyone even gets close, the intestines will dry out and rot. This is the reason why they need Lart as a slave. But the guy just sat holding onto the mop with all his might, holding back his resentment and anger, which made his face tighten as if he lowered the corners of his mouth down in an offended manner. Having already drunk an order of magnitude, the general says that he was afraid that the smell would get into his skin and wore gloves, and also said how difficult it was to pretend to care about the guy. And his patience did not run out only because the miners are very hardy and easy to tame, excellent candidates for a slave in all possible aspects. And even though it was all an ordinary conversation over a bottle, every word gnawed painfully into Lart's heart, leaving an indelible scar on him for the rest of his life. And everything that the men said was the pure truth, for which the guy was not at all ready. However, gritting his teeth, he listened and listened carefully to everything they said. And looking at how they calmly talk about their worst atrocities without a drop of shame, but simply over a bottle, in a good atmosphere of celebration and tranquility. Each of their atrocities touched the deepest corners of his soul, making him feel pain and resentment for everything that he had to experience, see, and hear. All those 10 years he spent in that stupid place, the unjust murder of his brother, attitude, hellish work, and everything he could endure was fun for them. And then the young man promised himself that no matter what happened on his path and in life, he would repay all these creatures in full, for everything that he had learned and for everything that he had experienced. The next day didn't take long to wait. The view of the mountains, clouds in the sky, and birds flying into the distance, free as the wind, the young man's knocks on the door were heard again. The voice shouts that the guy has a lot to do today, pushing a plate of food through the door window and throwing it on the ground, repeating yesterday's procedure, over and over again. Having opened the door, the warden shouts for Lart to get up immediately but does not finish seeing that Lart is already standing in the aisle where the food was thrown without his commands. The guy literally took the food from the Zmini and began to greedily eat the food given to him as quickly and as greedily as possible, looking at it like crazy, apparently a night without sleep. The man was surprised that Lart had already gotten up and calmed down his screams a little, while the guy said that he would quickly eat and finish all the work that he had been assigned for today. Looking at the warden with red, intense eyes with large and dark bags, some strange behavior is visible in his gaze, different from before. The man is clearly not delighted with such a close gaze and does not understand why his eyes are so red and what kind of feeling he is experiencing. His face is not so radiant anymore, and he just works with the concept of why he is doing this and what he intends to do in the future with everyone. A general passing by noticed how Lart was not behaving as usual while working, and watched him through the net while walking past his place of work. And noticing something wrong in the boy's behavior, the general thought about whether he was planning something strange before sacrificing him to the predators. Having called Lart, he with a dead look quickly answers the general's call and literally glares into the very soul of anyone who looks into his eyes. Putting on a fake smile, the general says that the guy looks lousy and also that he brought him food, so he wants him to eat as soon as possible. Lart's look at the general, filled with hidden anger, did not disappear, but a smile appeared that only made it worse and he agreed to eat. Greedily gobbling up the food offered to him by both cheeks, the guy perked up significantly and with a wild appetite in front of the general, slurped these balls in his mouth. Thanking the general while he slurped his food, the general began to give hypotheses about why the natural smell is so disgusting and whether he was worrying in vain, and said that he had to go. But still, after the general stopped thinking that something was wrong, moving further away from the guy, he decided that Lart remained the same voracious pig. Unbeknownst to the young man himself, the cruel everyday life passed and the time came for Lart to depart for the continent of nature, as well as the day of his growing up. We can see how one of the men who was sitting in the hall with two others is walking in a direction unknown to us through some doors in the dead of night, holding one hand behind his back. Having opened the double door, the man looks at the large number of balls that the young man was eating. Apparently this is a warehouse where they are stored, and then fed to Lart. The man thinks that there seems to be less natural food in the warehouse and is trying to see if some amount of this same food has gone missing. Well, after a while the man still thinks that it seemed obvious to him that 600,000 kilograms of natural food cannot decrease. Closing the door to the warehouse with a slam, the man decides that he is making a mistake by leaving the warehouse unattended all night. However, our young man was hiding behind a column in the warehouse, who was probably worried that he might be discovered, but he managed to avoid this. As soon as the guy realized that everything was quiet around him, he stood up and headed towards a huge pile of natural food that lay in the warehouse right in front of him. Coming close to the huge pile, Lart began to devour everything he saw with an inexorable appetite, not sparing his stomach. His gaze was vague because his only goal was to devour natural food, which he did with incredible greed and appetite. But after his eyes became visible, only the goal was visible in them, and this again was to eat all this food despite the capacity of his stomach. We see that Lart stole the very book with the horns of the natural faction drawn from the meeting room, but, unfortunately, he could not read it because he did not know how. Still, his intentions were persistent, and he decided that he had to find out the truth even if he had to eavesdrop in order to learn the letters and be able to read this book. Next you can see how the guy eavesdropped on lessons at the School of Carnivores in order to reliably learn the letters of this people and still read this treasured book. It can be seen how Lart did not sleep at night and tried to understand what kind of letters he saw and how they were read. And gradually understanding came to his head more and more. He learned how to write these letters, how to read them, how to understand them, all just to understand what was written in that book that would help him understand his nature. And finally he was able to understand what was written in the book. If by the time he grows up he does not grow horns, then he will not be considered capable of becoming mature. The illustration shows that sometimes there were cases when a lower being began to consume a huge amount of natural food, which exceeded its norm. Lart realized that there were exceptions where the horns might grow back much later and if he tried to become mature by over-consuming natural foods, that may die. That is why Lart always told him that if you reach maturity, you will become strong, and always helped him with all sorts of advice and by reminding him to eat on time. And Lart realized that if he wants to take revenge, then he needs to become mature at any cost, even if he eats too much, and this will give some chance of revenge on the offenders. Then, without any hesitation, he is ready to eat even more than excessively stuffing so much food into his roll that he is literally bursting at the seams. It doesn't matter to him whether he will succeed or whether he will simply die, he simply has no choice. The only thing he can do is simply eat too much. A situation when a natural learner consumes much more than is assumed by nature itself by his internal attitudes of body and mind. His desire seems to become obvious, and literally bursts along with his own body, from the huge amount of natural energy overwhelming him. And in fact, Lart literally mocked himself, in order to achieve the revenge for which his own heart, mind and body burned, which he destroyed. And the guy who went through all this was able to achieve even small changes thanks to all the efforts made that exceeded reasonable limits. However, these small changes were too few for full maturation, and here he is again in the clearings when his transition to growing up, unfortunately, is over. The ceremony of departure to the continent of nature is about to come, and the time given to prepare Lart is flowing away from him faster and faster. The three men gathered in the meeting room again and thought about the fact that the guy's horns had grown quite a bit, still calling him trash and not getting anything valuable. The general ponders aloud that they can still offer Lart as an offering if the horns are so important for a person to be considered a victim. The general also reminds that tomorrow will be the terrible day of the unknown 10-year cycle, so they must make sure that everything goes as smoothly as possible. It also reminds you that you need to remember to prepare a toxic poison that will apparently help neutralize Lart as easily as possible. The man asks the general if his brother wants a full barrel of extremely strong poison, along with the not too strong poison that they already have. Since Lart is different from his brother, the likelihood that they will need such a strong poison is extremely small, and the general himself also thinks about this. But still, relying on intuition, the general says that it's better, just in case, to take one barrel with you. You never know what could happen there. The next day arrived on the island, and the overseer leads Lart straight through the thicket of trees to the place designated for the sacrifice. However, the man turned his gaze to the young man behind him. There was some kind of purpose in his gaze, as if he wanted to tell something and maybe even give advice. The man addresses Larta in a rather rude manner, which attracts the attention of the young man following him and tears him away from his thoughts. Speaking frankly to the guy, he calls him a lower being, and as soon as he arrives on the continent of nature, he will definitely die by falling into the water or suffocating in the fog. He also says that it is impossible to cross the sea without being mature, and gives advice to the guy to just say that he wants to stay before it's too late. However, the man is silenced with a sharp and unexpected blow right to the nose, which he naturally did not expect and was in no way able to parry or defend himself. It turned out to be a general who simply does not benefit from what the man is now offering for the young man and says that Lard is already an adult, which the warden does not believe. Trying to object to the general, the man already receives a second blow, but is kicked in the stomach, which instantly shuts him up, which plays into the man's hands. The beating continues for a few more seconds while Lard watches this with a calm and empty gaze. From his look it is clear that he is not at all interested in this. The general shifts the blame to Warden Lard and says that the young man worked so hard and finally reached maturity, so there is no need to talk such nonsense. Having finally finished humiliating his brother, the general turns his attention to Lard standing nearby and asks him not to worry about this situation. Putting a false smile on his face, the general thinks that there is no need to worry about Lard's strength, and since he is immature, he is not able to get horns, they are just wasting time. Lard left the village with the 3 chiefs to complete the ceremony of sending to the nature continent, and after some time they arrived at the place. Continuing to blatantly lie, the general says that at this peak they will hold a small ceremony. Lard will take a boat to cross the water and reach the continent. The young man is dressed in the same clothes that his late brother wore 10 years ago, a blue robe with white fluff, while the general sarcastically asks what it's like to wear mature clothes. However, the guy looks as if he is completely desperate and completely empty inside from the awareness of powerlessness, thanks the general for his kindness while looking into the distance. Smiling falsely, the general holds that very poisonous sphere between his fingers and says that he has prepared something special on this day, and I suggest that you eat it. Turning his gaze to the sphere, it was clear how filled he was with greed, so the guy did not choose what to eat and thanked the general again. The young man did not care about the type of natural food, and out of greed, he ate the gift offered to the generals in a matter of seconds without the slightest suspicion. As expected, the real purpose of this poisonous natural food was to completely paralyze the entire body of the last representative of the mining faction, Lart. After the guy greedily swallowed the sphere, the general began to quietly wait in anticipation of what the effect of this poison would be on the body in front of him. In just a matter of seconds, Lart's eyes opened much wider than usual and became covered with capillaries from tension, and the poison had an effective effect. Watching the guy literally thrown onto his back at the moment he spits blood, the men understand that the younger one has a much stronger reaction. The men began to mock the suffering young man, calling him inferior and calling this the main reason for such a strong effect of the paralyzing poison. At that moment, the men began their mockery, saying that Larch lasted much longer. The guy was already completely unconscious with traces of blood from his mouth. Having written off the so-called inferior Lart, the men had already decided to start acting, but were not in too much of a hurry because they were sure of the guy's death. The guy's eyes were completely empty, there were literally no pupils. Perhaps Lart really left this world, but he was never able to avenge his brother. But no, let blood flow from his eyes, but he does not give up. His bright yellow pupil glows with rage feeding from the very depths of his heart. Something is happening. Thinking that they had already won, the men were discouraged by the fact that Lart began to get up. However, a completely different aura was felt from him. A loud scream sounded from the guy's lips, reminiscent of his presence, his eyes filled with blood, from the rage that overwhelmed him. The leaders do not understand why he is still conscious, and continues to fight, because the poison should have affected him. After all, he is the lowest of the miners. But the general notices something and asks his colleague again, because he cannot even put his mind to it and think what it is and what is happening. The faction of miners themselves is resistant to all types of poison, from small to large, from strong to weak, from fatal to frivolous. Since Lart worked in a mine with Black Ore for many years, it was natural that he developed resistance to all kinds of poisons and poisons. However, this caused a burning reaction in the guy's organs that did not allow the toxins to spread, but one of his organs that played an important role. He recognized the natural energy that the guy had been accumulating for so long through such efforts and torment as poisonous, and therefore blocked its entry into the body. It was this organ that was the reason why his horns did not grow at all, no matter how much natural food he consumed, and also could not mature as an adult. This whole situation could be described in 2 words: Lart's absorption function, the most important function, in his entire body was blocked. But at the moment, due to the poisonous natural food he absorbed, which paralyzed his entire body and practically killed our main character. For a moment, when Lart lay unconscious, and the men thought that he had already died, all the functions of his body were suspended, as if hibernating. And if his whole body literally went into hibernation, then that same organ that was blocking all that energy had finally stopped functioning. And since he is no longer able to block all that previously accumulated natural energy, he began to greedily absorb everything to the last drop. That is why Lart did not die, but his eyes lit up with a bright yellow light, and you can see how he feels that all the energy that he had began to be absorbed, every single one. Lying with his head thrown back, you can see how his small horns began to shake a little and seem to grow in height with a characteristic sound. Raising his head, you can see that his horns really began to grow, and his face shows only anger from the fact that he was betrayed, and his eyes completely dimmed, and his face changed. Literally in an instant, huge red and beautiful horns grew from the guy's head, which were still covered with a slimy liquid, like a newborn's. Looking at the one whom a few seconds ago they considered a lower being, the men do not understand what is happening, because just now he was lying on the ground in agony. Lart got down on one knee, showing with all his appearance that he was now a truly mature individual and certainly not the inferior creature he had been before. Calmly getting up from his knee, Lart thinks that he doesn't need any confirmation, he doesn't need to move to feel it fully. Having risen to his feet, he calmly shook himself off, as if nothing had happened, standing firmly on the ground, although he had just been poisoned by a paralyzing poison. But what exactly the guy understands is that the leaders from the group of predators, compared to him, are just pathetic ants that need to be crushed. Raising his head up and closing his eyes, the guy feels all the energy flowing in his body and finally understands what his brother was talking about. He is glad that he understood it. Opening his eyes, his look changed significantly and he understood what awakening the mature that his brother had been talking about all the time really meant. However, the plump man, seeing that Lart had reached maturity, thought only of how to cheat and make fresh liquor from his horns, congratulating the guy on this achievement. However, when the man ran up to Larta, he did not look as happy as he himself, but only stood and looked into God knows where. His gaze could not be seen behind the darkness. Literally a moment later, the smiling face of one of the leaders, unexpectedly for him, crumples due to a blow to the right cheek from the clenched fist of the guy standing opposite him. From such a strong blow, the man flew past his colleagues at great speed, and with a roar, fell like a sack of potatoes into the thicket of a nearby forest. From what they saw, two of the remaining men were speechless because they are the leaders, and therefore the strongest on the island, but Lart was able to send one of them flying. The guy's eyes glowed scarlet from the rage that overwhelmed him, and veins appeared on his face from such tension, but definitely not physical. I remember all those days when he worked for Slaughter, like some kind of machine. He says out loud that he simply does not have time to explain anything to those men. He also remembers how he worked in the mines and carried huge amounts of poisonous black ore, how he dragged heavy wheelbarrows filled with stones and more. And he also remembers the words that those men spoke about and imagines a situation where they are standing on the slope and looking down with malicious smiles. And just as his older brother falls straight into the clutches of terrible predators, he is also poisoned and left without one horn, from which they will later make swill. Turning his gaze filled with regret, grief, rage and resentment, Lart says that all those who stand on this cliff are with him today. Against the background of the bloody moon, the guy himself looks like a beast, with his huge red and sharp horns, and says that everyone will go to hell with him. In such a situation, the two men standing in front of the guy became pretty tense, and their genetically inherent instinct in the face of danger was triggered. Standing in front of the leader of the group of predators with whom the guy is now fighting, literally looming like a disaster, gives a clear understanding of what is happening. In the pitch darkness one can see the personification of Lart, looking like a huge unstoppable beast ready to direct its fangs and part of its strength at small prey. While three of the leaders look like small dogs, driven into a corner by such a serious and strong enemy in front of them, afraid of being devoured. The guy's terribly looming shadow is visible in the general's eyes, and he is surprised that he has never seen representatives of the miners' faction like those standing in front of him. However, the general also does not understand why he thinks about this in such a situation, but when he was young, he heard an incredible story from the elders. After all, if we return to the true history of 1,000 years ago, there are groundless rumors that a natural group ruled over the carnivorous faction. Hanging with his shadow and hellishly ominous aura, as if death itself was looking at them, the guy stands a few meters from the men, as if confirming the rumors. The gatherers literally ignored and completely buried their enormous potential with their overly docile and submissive instincts. And to their grief, they were deceived by the insidious representatives of the predatory faction, and the group of miners was slowly mowed down, doomed to extinction. However, in Lart's case, this submissive instinct in his body turned into pure rage, personifying a club covered in soft velvet. That is why he stood like a mountain, looming over his opponents, making his intentions and strength clear, making them worry about their safety. This instinct became so strong that it burst out, as if the mace was covered with a scarlet flame that wanted to consume everything that was in its path. However, such thoughts of the general are not at all pleasing, because he is confident in his strength, and some representative of the natural faction cannot defeat him. Going on the offensive, the man thinks that he cannot play with someone who has never studied martial arts, they should succeed, and gives the order to detain Lart. However, just after uttering his order, his face crumples like a child's accordion from such a strong blow, which he clearly did not quite expect. Lart does not stop, and makes another confident and powerful blow straight to the face, causing the general's head to tip back and begin to fall down. But at the moment of this, the left hand, which was located behind the guy's body, was put into combat readiness, so to speak, and another powerful blow was inevitable. And so it turned out, the left hand landed perfectly on the right cheek, causing the representative of the predator faction to spit out his own blood. The vaunted martial arts master literally didn't even have time to blink an eye as the series of attacks on his face was completed. There was no question of a counterattack. Without giving him a chance to think about the situation, Lart slams his forehead against the man's forehead, forcing him to close his eyes and lose the chance for sound coordination. His eyes opened wider, and his pupils shrank significantly, showing how afraid he was and how he was experiencing real animal fear of the enemy. At the moment of everything that was happening, the second man was standing literally a few meters away, and did not have time to understand how it all happened looking back. The second man saw the situation with his own eyes and could not come up with anything better than simply calling Lart a bastard, showing the deplorable nature of the situation. Swinging his sharp claws on his hands, tensing up, the man utters a characteristic cry in the hope that his blow will cause at least some damage. However, Lart was stopped by holding the general by the throat in one hand and slamming his face into the ground with the other as punishment for such terrible behavior. Seeing this situation, the general tries to take over the initiative of the battle, and grabs his opponent's hand, calling him trash. I think that he has a chance. Lart, of course, is wonderful, and turns his anger-filled gaze to the second opponent, whom he just held by the throat. Like a slimy snake, the general wrapped himself around the guy's hand in the hope that he could break it, or even completely immobilize him and defeat him without any problems. Smiling, thinking that he has already won and outwitted his opponent, he says that he will first break one of his hands, showing his intentions and enthusiasm. Having completely grasped his part of the body, he begins to put all his weight on just one of the guy's arms with the goal of breaking it at least in half, and maybe worse. However, here's the thing, the efforts of his entire body, arms and legs, do not give any, even the slightest, effect on the strong, recently matured hand of the guy. Raising the entire weight of the mountain with one hand, Lart makes something like a swing at a blow, as if preparing to slam another midge on the wall. With his blow, the guy slams the general, who was sitting on his hand, face first into the ground, causing it to split after the previous representative of the same faction. Well, something attracts the guy's attention, his eyes open wider in surprise. Apparently the general managed to do something. The general is standing on his hands, dust is flying around him, he is shaking all over from the damage he received, and then the realization comes to him that he could die. Having recovered a little from the sudden blow, the man launches a counterattack, strengthening his arms and swinging his leg straight at the guy's face. Unfortunately, Lart does not have time to parry an equally unexpected blow from the general, whom he had already considered incapacitated by his powerful attack. Flying back a little, he successfully lands on his feet while the general wipes the blood flowing from his head and recovers a little from all that damage. Wiping off all the blood, the man looks at his opponent with contempt, calls him a brat, but understands that he will lose if he does not fight him at full strength. The sun is getting closer and closer to the horizon, but the battle is only gaining momentum. Columns of raised dust from all the movements during the battle are visible on the cliff. The man lunges forward, delivering multiple slashing attacks with his razor-sharp claws, releasing his sinister purple-colored aura. Lart tries to block all the damage coming at him, but unfortunately is unable to keep up with the speed of his more experienced opponent. Makes 3 consecutive lunges, the man jumps and heads forward, straight towards the guy, intending to strike his opponent. The man flies knee first straight towards the target, and in his eyes you can see the desire to win. The blood on his forehead has already frozen, which means the battle lasts quite a long time. The blow is almost upon Lart. Will he have time to parry or block? Or maybe even make a counterattack? It all depends only on his reaction and speed. The blow hit the target and, unfortunately for Lart, it hits, but the man definitely does not intend to stop, and after this blow the next one will follow. The general showers the guy with a hail of attacks from all possible sides. He has no choice but to block all the attacks coming his way. The guy quietly endures all the attacks that come from the general and waits for the right moment for a powerful counterattack. Of course the guy is angry, he is furious with everything that is happening, and his eyes do not stop burning. Apparently he has waited for the right moment and is about to deliver the decisive blow. The machine gun burst from the general's attacks is finally broken, and he stops with a grimace of fear and, at the same time, a lack of understanding of what is happening on his face. In his pupil you can see the reflection of Lart's leg raised straight up, which is about to fall on him like a piece of ice breaking off from an iceberg. The only thing that remains for the general is to say the characteristic damn and accept his fate from the sudden change of events in the direction of his enemy. As if drawing a line through the air, Lart's leg falls down like a guillotine onto the death row's neck until he can do nothing but kneel. Fortunately, his powerful blow hits the general in the back of the head and slams him into the ground again, but this time it's successful, and he didn't block it. Cracks spread out all over the nearby ground, with a characteristic crack, showing how much effort Lart put into this kick, and what feelings he has for the enemy. Lifting his leg from the general's face, you can see how he lost consciousness from such a powerful blow, even though he is a martial arts master, but this did not save him. The guy stands and looks at his defeated opponent from top to bottom and recovers his breath a little after a protracted fight. His face has completely changed. It looks like the face of an animal whose hunt has ended successfully and will be able to eat fresh meat as a reward for its efforts. However, an exclamation is heard that the guy is a monster. This is the same man who has flown into the thicket of the bamboo forest, and he thinks that he needs to run away. Looking at the picture of his comrades lying lifelessly stuck in the ground, he puts his thoughts into action, takes his hands to his feet and rushes to run. However, Lart did not plan to let anyone go from this cliff. He jumped over the man's head, as if a vulture had noticed weak prey in the desert. With a loud crack of the ground under his feet, he landed exactly in front of the fleeing man, who clearly did not expect such a turn of events. Without thinking twice, Lart grabs him by the neck and lifts him up with his head, so that he can only flounder with his legs in order to get out. After recovering a little, the general sits up from the blows and thinks that Lart has probably never even studied any special martial arts from any factions. I remember how he and his friends trained. I think that with only strength and endurance, the guy humiliated them who were versed in martial arts. And yet, it finally pops into my head that, apparently, it was not in vain that the elders brought the miners almost to extinction. In the end, this force will be truly decisive. The guy specifically took the man by the throat and raised him in front of him, and began asking him to tell him what they did to Larch that day, 10 years ago. In his eyes you can see how angry the guy is for what they did to his brother, and how hurt he is. He tells the man, giving him a chance at redemption, to tell the truth. However, the man stands his ground, and even when he is being strangled, he barely says that his brother went to the continent of nature and thereby blatantly lies. From such a blatant lie, even being on the verge of death, Lart literally loses his head due to rage, because even so he could not force the man to tell the truth. But as the man blatantly lied to the guy's face, Lart's fist flies into his face. The guy does not intend to restrain his strength in order to find out the truth about his brother. The guy intends to extract a confession by force, and asks if all men don't think of the representatives of the natural faction as a form of entertainment. But the man still doesn't want to admit his guilt, putting on a fake smile as if they are doing good, despite what they are going to do. However, he didn't want to hear fairy tales about his brother's happy life, and he shouts that he saw horns in a bottle in the meeting room, and his eyes get wet from such words. The man, realizing that it would be impossible to lie, remembers the excellent swill that they peacefully drank, and for the first time he will have to answer for his crimes. Lark recalls how he and his brother were obedient dogs and regularly did everything they were told, working like hell, doing all the dirty work. Tears flow from the guy's eyes like a river because of how devoted he was, and how sad he is for his brother who these three scum killed by pushing him off this cliff. The man tries to justify himself and begs Lark to wait and listen to him as he prepares to strike the blow that will end his opponent's life. A few meters from the interrogation, the wounded representatives of the carnivorous faction are trying to gather their strength, and the general brings his friend to his senses. As soon as the man was able to hear the general and was conscious, he whispers to him to shoot with the pre-taken poison before Lark notices. Having gathered his strength, the man stands up and puts on his back something that vaguely looks like a flower sprayer or something like that. Not pressing the trigger once, nothing. Apparently some kind of breakdown occurred during the brawl or even before all this, perhaps due to negligence. The mechanism turns out to be rusty, because the man could not even think that it would ever be needed, which is why he did not clean or repair the device at all, which is clearly worrying him. But the general loudly says that he shouldn't be foolish and just knock over the tank with the poison itself on Lart, without thinking about whether the mechanism is working or not. But one vice general says that he can also get a man, but the general says that the situation now is such that there is no point in thinking about this. Watching from a distance as Lart beats the vice general holding him by the neck, he agrees and hurries to remove the tank and unscrew the lid on it. Receiving blow after blow, the man seems to be either desperate or hoping for something, his teeth are flying out, and there is already a lot of blood on his face. However, even in this state, he manages to notice how another man is quickly approaching them with a reservoir of poison that will be dumped on them. The man screams loudly and points with his hand, saying that if poison is spilled, it will get on him, which causes Lart to turn his gaze back to the man with the flask. Smiling and betraying his comrade, the general says that there is no difference, because they must survive, so he tells the man not to stop. And so he does. With his eyes closed, the man swings a flask full of purple substance, which can cause irreparable harm. He splashes the contents of the flask on the two in front of them, forming a dark wall of dangerous liquid flying towards them, with no chance of dodging or saving. The poison completely covers both of them, and gives different effects on their bodies, but they are both weakened and cannot do anything with such a strong toxin. Reveling in his victory, the general says that the level of poisons varies, and he also could not imagine that he would use such a rare poison on someone like Lart. The poison almost completely dissolved the man as he lay and made his last gurgles, while Lart was paralyzed and significantly weakened, but alive and without visible problems. Since there was a thicket of bamboo not far from all that mess, the general decides to cut down several sharp sticks for some purpose. After sharpening the bamboo and making spears from it, they use them to push him off the cliff for safety, but the vice general wants to add something. He says that then they will cut off his horns to make the most delicious liquor possible, but the general's face is not as cheerful as the other man's. By sharply grabbing the blind man by the scruff of the neck, the general shows his dissatisfaction with his words, but the man clearly did not expect such a reaction, because he had already relaxed. Lowering the man from heaven, the general says not to relax just because Lart is paralyzed, since he recovers many times faster than his brother. Gradually, with their improvised stakes, the two men bring Lart to the very edge of the cliff, who cannot resist due to almost complete paralysis. Lart realizes that his whole body has become hard and continues to harden so much that he is no longer able to move a finger, which of course stresses him out. The guy is covered in a purple substance and it's hard for him to concentrate, he can't control his thoughts and body, all because of the toxin spilled on him. Under the exclamation of the general, and a pair of blows with spears, the men push Lart forward, straight from the same cliff that happened to his brother 10 years ago. Unable to do anything, the guy simply looks up at his enemies with an empty and desperate look, like his older brother. Speaking of the fact that the predators smell him and come running, he's definitely finished. He won't be able to fight back because of the toxin, plus the general says this because this is the place. This is the cliff into which, once you fall, you can never return. They call it the Cliff of the Unknown, and it is into it that Lard is now flying straight down. The flight down was interrupted by a ledge against which Lard's body sprung, pushing him further into the ravine, causing damage to his back on which he fell from such a great height. Having hit the ledge, it is clear that his body, unfortunately, is not made of metal and he received damage from this blow. Blood is proof of this. Landing flat on your back with a characteristic slap and impact, you can see how the toxin doesn't even think about stopping its effect and purple fumes are visible. Having formed a small dent in the shape of his body at the site of the fall, almost losing consciousness from the poison and the fall at the same time, the guy lies on the ground. In his memories, the face of his brother emerges, who, right before leaving for the same cliff, that he will be waiting on the continent of nature. Exhaling literally his last breaths and looking into nowhere, covered in purple slurry that takes away all his strength and the ability to simply move. Against the background of the same bloody moon, the dark silhouette of a beast already familiar to us called Predator is visible, looking at the almost dead guy with its 5 eyes. The lying guy was surrounded by 3 predators who were preparing to pounce on their weak prey and leave in its place nothing but bones, and maybe they would eat them too. One of the predators takes the horned and weak guy in his hand and brings him closer to his hidden mouth with a huge tongue dripping with saliva. Trying to get out, the guy tries his best to do at least something, but the effect of the poison is too noticeable and he is not even able to move in the strong grip of the beast. The only thing the guy can do is bite the hand of the predator holding him with all his might, showing that he wants to fight, despite the fact that he is poisoned. The beast holding the guy in his hand did not like this act at all, and he began to howl heart-rendingly from the pain that he felt, albeit from a small but strong bite. Not wanting to endure this, the beast slams the guy into the ground with all his evil strength, from which the already wounded guy receives another portion of wounds. Falling out of the dent in the shape of his body, the guy takes a longitudinal breath from the pain that he felt, but unfortunately cannot respond with anything. Having fallen from that recess, the guy falls to his knees, realizing that he is unable to do anything against those enemies that are waiting for him very close. Meanwhile, there were far from 3 or 5 monsters, more than 2 dozen came running towards fresh prey, at least waiting for the right moment to pounce. The monsters literally began to rejoice in their desire to reprisal the already tortured guy who was lying like a corpse on the ledge of a sheer cliff. A strong blow was directed towards the guy and hits him, destroying part of the rock into shattering pieces, but a strange-looking lightning is visible that is unlike anything else. The predator himself raised his gaze upward to the lightning coming from the very sky, on which there were not even rain clouds to form such white lightning as this. Lightning literally struck a group of animals, as if it intended to hit exactly there, attracting the attention of all the monsters to this strange phenomenon. However, at some point, from the white lightning one can see how someone in silver armor is holding under his arm a wounded and exhausted guy who fell from a cliff. The black sky erupts with multiple lightning strikes, as if someone is walking along it, like a catwalk, but only at great speed and much more spectacular. Against the backdrop of a huge moon of dreams, you can see someone who seems to be flying, with a guy on his arm, saving him from inevitable death in that ditch from the clutches of monsters. A piece of silver armor, namely the boot, literally stands on lightning, white as day, spreading its power around and showing how strong he is. Making a lightning jump, at great speed and with white lightning strikes in all possible directions, someone literally does not let you see who he is and who he is. But an unknown person appears before us, completely dressed in silver armor, as if it were his skin, and he holds the guy standing on a round zipper like 2 fingers on the asphalt. This unknown person literally has iron skin and is surrounded by an electric aura, since he is from the electric faction and nothing else is known about him. The retreat tells of the day of change, and when a certain mountain temple of Shin AK in Garth, a huge statue standing on the mountain, turned ominously black in the middle of the day. All the beautiful landscapes of the continent shrouded in a slight haze and thick clouds in the sky, a good but cloudy day, but not everything is so simple. The entire continent shook like crazy, due to earthquakes with very high amplitude and power, which was unexpected and fatal. The entire continent literally turned inside out, tsunamis began, the ground cracked underfoot, disasters covered all possible peaceful land on the planet. There was not a single safe place from all these disasters, as if hell itself had come to Earth out of the blue, but these were not all the problems ahead. On the continent under the name Gartha, from multiple breaks in the soil, predators began to climb out of the ground, capturing it completely in just 3 days. But we return to our lightning-fast unknown, who headed to a small continent called Bido, east of the Carnivore Island. Carefully landing on the stones, the unknown person, also shrouded in lightning, apparently brings the guy to a safe place, wanting to help. His huge and sharp horns shrouded in lightning, along with strands similar to hair, seem to show his strength while he carries the poison man to an unknown destination. Entering a certain cave on the same island, bringing the guy there, it is not clear what he wants. After all, he saved Lart, but only for selfish purposes, it is not yet clear. The dark cave with stalactites showed with all its appearance how much more creepy it was inside than looking at it from the outside, which is why Lart was brought here. The unknown man put the unconscious guy in front of him and squatted on his right side, looking and apparently deciding what to do with such a seriously poisoned man. Having clenched his steel fist, the unknown person probably decided what he would do, whether he would help, or whether he would do something else, worse or better. He began to talk about the fact that they moved to a desert island, away from carnivores, for safety, while he looked at the guy with his gray eyes. Placing his hand on the guy's chest, the unknown person notices internal injuries, much worse than one might think, and his heart is beating very weakly. The unknown person begins to literally shock the unconscious guy, calling it regeneration with direct current. There was so much current that it filled the cave. Deciding that there is no other choice, the unknown person decides to pass an electric current through the guy's body, the only way he can help the weakened guy. And also, in his thoughts, he asks Lart to hold on so that he can help. It is obvious that the guy is in pain while his body is receiving a huge amount of direct current. The guy's empty eyes open very wide, becoming covered with capillaries until some red veins begin to cover his face, which doesn't seem right. After a while, the unknown person stops this electric chair while continuing to hold his hand on the guy's chest to find out if his methods helped. He also notices some strange protruding red veins on the guy's neck, which did not look very natural, attracting electricity. Many such capillaries covered the tense body with open empty eyes of the guy who was still unconscious, apparently helped. The red capillaries began to gradually disappear, becoming more transparent, and the guy's eyes began to close and the tension in his face disappeared. Finally, the young man exhales calmly with a smile on his face, as if going to bed on a comfortable bed after a hard day of work, allowing himself to rest. The unknown man's eyes became bluer and enlarged in surprise. Looking at the guy, he simply remains silent, carefully looking for something in him. This world has its own ranking system, and Lart is at the very bottom at the low alpha level, and even despite this level, he has an inferior physique. Lart absorbed all the energy that was poured into him in order to heal. Usually before the regenerative forces can be absorbed, the body dies from the load. However, the unknown person remembers someone named Venus, and thinks that this unknown person predicted something and it came true. Perhaps we are talking about Larda. The unknown person thinks that Lart goes beyond all boundaries of logic and common sense, and he is 100% sure of this, looking at how he lies unconscious. Seeing the light, as if there is light on the other side, someone is calling Lart. Apparently this is the voice of his older brother, and it is he who is calling him from the other side, really. But the light began to inevitably approach and increase in size after one word uttered by that voice. He told the guy to get up. Lart's feet can be seen heading towards the bright, warm light, like the light from the sun on a bright and open field on a sunny and hot day in midsummer. The light gets bigger and bigger, and a voice says that everyone is waiting for the guy. It's not clear who they all are, but they are waiting for him, just as the voice says. Approaching the light, Lart shielded himself with his hand from such a blinding light hitting him straight in the face, while the guy goes out to an unknown destination, as if he were an artist in public. The guy came out to a certain hill from which a very strange view of some people opened up, in an incomprehensible place, at an incomprehensible time. Everything was incomprehensible. The voice says that all of Garth is waiting for him, and all the leaders, while the guy stands in front of thousands of all kinds of people from different factions, who are apparently leaders. Finally, we are transported to the real world, where Lart lies with his eyes closed on the ground in the very cave where the unknown owner of lightning brought him. Finally, the guy wakes up from his sleep, and his eyes are filled with no understanding of the situation that is happening to him, and what he just saw, what it was. Having risen, the guy does not understand where he is lost in space, because this is his first time outside his native content and it is not clear where. Holding the walls in his head, the guy slowly reaches the exit from the cave, simultaneously groaning from all the wounds and damage received earlier in the battle. Raising his gaze from the floor, Lart pays attention in front of him, and is not the least surprised, still holding his sore head, apparently suffering from pain in his head. The unknown man stands and looks at the sea, rejoicing in the fact that Lart has finally woken up, and greeted the awakened guy. The unknown man's face is half hidden because of his helmet, while he stands and looks at the guy who has just recently woken up, and yet he has good motives. Seeing the unknown man, the guy is surprised that he knows his name, and asks if he accidentally saved him from imminent death under a cliff. Turning away from Lart, the unknown man looks at the ocean surf of blue water, and at the continent of carnivores from which he saved the guy, and answers the guy that yes. The unknown person begins not to drag on, saying that he wants to get straight to the point, and his metal face shows the seriousness of his intentions. Turning again to Larta, the unknown person, against the backdrop of waves pounding from the shore and a cloudy sky, tells him that they only have 10 days during that entire time. Extending his helping hand, someone says that he is simply obliged to teach the guy martial arts for all this time he has been given on this island. The guy's face shows bewilderment at the words of the man standing in front of him with his hand outstretched. His eyes show that he doesn't understand what's happening. Someone understands that, as he expected, this is very unexpected and difficult to understand, while the guy is deep in thought about his words. The guy tries to pull himself together by taking a deep breath and changing his face, standing silently and as if he wants to say something. The guy's face becomes much calmer, and it becomes more relaxed, and he says that everything is normal. In truth, what he did was wait. Telling the unknown, he simply silently listens attentively to the guy, and he knows that at least someone from everyone he knows or doesn't know, simply. Remembering all those tyrannies, working as a slave for carnivores, I was waiting for at least someone to end all those hellish everyday life, behaving obediently like a dog, because everyone. In the gap of a certain lattice, a beautiful moon is visible, letting its light into the dark and empty space, which is stuck in the guy's memory. Sitting on a kind of bed made of hay, Lart looks into the cutout in which the moon is visible, and realizes that he was only thinking about how he waited for each new day. Opening his eyes, Lart says that he needs to go to the island of nature, and with pity in his eyes, he hesitantly asks for help from a stranger. The guy falls to his knees, realizing his weakness, and the fact that he simply needs training, while the stranger simply remains silent, doing nothing, just watching. Lart, bowing his head in front of the stranger, asks him to teach him the art of combat, so that he would be able to fight for what is dear to him, and further. Someone just looks at the desperate guy kneeling and remains silent, as if checking something or thinking about something about him. With a sharp movement, the stranger places his hand on Lart's shoulder, which frightens him and makes him worry about the situation he is in at the moment. Approaching the guy, someone tells him to call the electroshock. For this he needs to remember all the days he has experienced and feel them again. Encouraged by such instructions, Lart agrees with fire in his eyes, looking straight at his new teacher, and hoping that he can learn something. Lart sat in a butterfly position in front of the standing stranger as he commanded him in his calm voice to close his eyes and concentrate. When the guy closed his eyes, someone tells him to look inside himself and concentrate as hard as possible, in which the calm sound of the surf will help. The unknown continues that it is important for the guy to delve into his own thoughts, and also focus on the energy of nature that flows in his blood. While the guy listens carefully to the teacher with his eyes closed, while he tells the guy that he needs to expand his spectrum and feel every bit of his strength. He must open his range even more and accept all the energy of nature in it, then distribute it over the 4 limbs, and after that, to direct it outside the body, This process of concentrating on one part of the body and emitting natural energy is called warming. And the materialization of the emitted resource and its use for the purposes of battle or other reason is already called catching. Larta is told to open his eyes. He looks completely calm and collected, and takes a long exhale, making something like a seal with his hands, looking clearly ahead of him with a focused gaze. The unknown person standing in front of the guy makes the remark that the methods of activating techniques in the electrofaction are different from the natural faction, however. Focusing on natural energy and condensing it and emitting an electrical wavelength are completely analogous since the principles are the same. The teacher also says that all this information is only the basis and is only the first level. It will be easier to understand if you see everything with your own eyes. The teacher concentrates his electrical energy on the toe of one of the feet, from which small discharges and white sparks begin to emanate. He makes a quick strike towards Lart, but not to harm him, since he is not going to hit, and says that this is warming. The young man sees that his teacher's toe was driven into the ground, and the distance he walked left behind him a trail of molten earth that turned into lava. Raising his leg, the teacher shows what catching is. Under his feet it's as if a platform made of lightning appears on which he stands, as seen earlier. The sight of the teacher hanging in the air excites the guy to the core, and he is delighted with what he sees in front of him, after so many years of just working. Lart is shocked that his teacher is walking through the air as if nothing had happened, and while the guy is in shock, someone says that this is the key to the first level. However, what did Lart feel after seeing this? Shock? Excitement? Admiration or pleasure? What did he feel? However, the only thing the young man thought about was what a wondrous and exciting world is beyond the horizon, and how this is possible. The feeling of excitement from the thought that he himself would not be able to bring this to life in a second took over his body and slowly drove him crazy. What kind of sensation was this? The unknown person says that they only have 10 days to do everything, half of which will take so that the guy can get acquainted with the feeling of this power. He also adds that for many people even 5 months would not be enough, and the guy will probably think that there is not enough time, but they don't have much of it, so there is no point in delaying it. But turning his gaze back to the young man, someone's eyes open wider from the shock that struck his whole body and thoughts, what had the newly made teacher seen? But there is a digression about the one who has the most perfect voice and lung strength on the supercontinent, will be the cause of the vulcanized Parma. However, after birth, Parma did not sing for 100 years, because she had no ears, and since she was deaf, it is obvious that there was no idea of sound at all. But in the 100th year, magically she finally developed sharp and large ears, somewhat similar to the sound-sensitive ears of the forest elves. Parma began to hear what all this sounds like, stretching for hundreds of thousands of kilometers around her person in different directions. And within 2 days, she managed to combine all the sounds of this world in order to create perfect harmony, and a demonstration of the electrocutor, like Parma's ears. This was just the beginning of a breathtakingly exciting and interesting experience for Lart, who raised his foot as if to take a step. There was no need to study. Lart simply tried to repeat what he saw, because he immediately understood everything, having seen everything with his own eyes. The teacher, standing in shock, looked at the guy's efforts, until in the end he instantly managed to repeat what he had seen for the first time in his life. A bright pink aura erupted from Lart's legs, which kept him in the air like the floor, while the teacher thought that the guy had class realization S. Next, we see a certain frame that shows the rank of the Lart character. A certain cycle system says that he has realization S, embodies the created arts. The frame changes, we see how there is a torrential downpour on the street. A young man sleeps peacefully in a cave, while his teacher stands in the rain for some purpose. Standing in the rain, the silvered unknown man looks into the distance, with clenched hands, and holds them at the seams, showing his calmness. However, his face seems to be in sadness, perhaps something is tormenting him, and he, standing in the rain, thinks about this situation or action. We are shown the past of the unknown, where he stands on a stone bridge with his back to another someone from the same electrofaction, and he is directly dissatisfied with something. Speaking in the back that the Savior described in the Holy Scriptures is a brat from the natural faction, which clearly irritates and worries him. The golden representative of the one who says that Venus has gone mad is called Tricella, who has embodimada, and he continues to talk about the delusion of the prediction. Grinding his sharp teeth and squinting his eyes angrily, he says that this is an underprediction, an arrogant and stupid insult to the entire history of the electric faction. He freaks out and shouts that from this day on, interfering with the sacred faction is prohibited, because they say to accept this nonsense, and the teacher is expelled from the faction. We find out the name of the teacher. This is Taser, who says that he simply accepts the message of Venus and goes forward taking it for granted, because there is no other way out. Tricella tells Taser that the exiled one will never receive help in that place again, and he will no longer be able to take a step on the lightning continent. Tensing and beginning to release her powers, Tricella shouts that the next time they meet, they will be considered enemies to each other, nothing else. The Taser comes to Venus, who calmly tells her follower that those who resist fate cannot think sensibly and accept the truth. She has creation S++, and says that, despite the fact that at the beginning the nature faction is weak, but there you can find a child with the highest level of embodiment. And this child will be able to slowly develop his strength and low alpha level with slow and confident steps, overcoming all the difficulties along the way. He will be able to walk up a huge staircase reaching into the sky, and become their highest possible creation and the personification of power, Omega. And it explains that natural energy is not absorbed only internally, by absorbing large amounts of food or another source. But it is also absorbed externally, because it is individual for each creature living in a certain faction and not only in the natural one. Such energy slowly but surely increases without stopping only on the scale of the body of its carrier, easily going beyond its scope. Standing on a high pedestal, Venus says that Taser is simply obliged to find this unknown child of the natural faction anywhere, throughout the world. Taser answers her with an agreement, saying that Garth cannot exist together with predators and Omega-level monsters that are higher than others. After all, the king of predators has had a certain master and mandatory plan under the ominous name Eve for a long time. And for each of Garth who was able to escape the law of annihilation, which is unknown to us, and only seen during the course of the battle, Taser loses one of his eyes. And for everyone, this is the only way out, but even having lost an eye, Taser keeps looking with anger and confidence at the one who tore out his important organ. Remembering his story from the past, Taser still stands in the pouring rain looking down while lightning is visible as if he is angry about something, and this is obvious. 10 days later, a prominent island observation tower is located on the hill of the mountain on which representatives of the carnivores live, and one looks out from the tower. This turns out to be the vice general who survived the battle with Lart, who is sweating a lot and is worried about what he sees from the tower's spyglass. Through a spyglass, the man sees Lart and Taser calmly walking towards their village, intending to do something certainly not good for its inhabitants. Concentrating his attention on the guy, he pronounces his name with shock, because he was sure that he was devoured alive and not even bones were left. He immediately began to run away from the tower and head to the general's main residence to report such shocking news. The man bangs on the door and shouts for the general to pay attention to him and listen to his important news about who he saw. The general stands with his back to the door, asking what the noise is, while the out-of-breath vice general runs into the building and breathes heavily. Having fallen to his knees, he tries to swallow air with his mouth. At the same time he says that he saw Lart alive, who is returning to the village. The concerned general turns to the man, shouting about what kind of nonsense he is talking about, because Lart fell from a cliff of no return. How could he even survive? Bowing his head, the man agrees with the general's words and says that Lart's fall was even confirmed, but he wants to say something else. But stirring up the general's interest, he says that Lart, who was together with a certain person, was heading precisely towards the carnivorous village. A grimace of interest and bewilderment is visible on the general's face. In his thoughts he seems to be asking the man who kept Lart company. The vice general makes a hypothesis that the person accompanying Lart is none other than Taser himself from the electric faction. Apparently he is a popular warrior. Not the least surprised by this news, the general calls Taser lightning, and it turns out that he got from the continent to their island connected to land. He also thinks that after the day of change the channel was completely saturated with poison, and getting from the continent to the island would be simply an impossible goal. And the general also does not understand that the hero of lightning himself, famous for his strength, is clearly not the least important person in this magical and dangerous world. What did he forget in such a godforsaken wilderness, because this is a very distant place, that he could need here on the island? But still, the general is sure that it is impossible to climb the slope since it is covered with a deadly poison that will paralyze you just by touching it. Even the predator monsters, boasting of their strength, cannot climb into this place, so the logical question arises of how he managed to do this. The general turns to the window looking into the distance with the thought that even if this is the case, he must be prepared for all possible outcomes. Some time passes, and a huge number of people have gathered in the square in the village, standing on a stage on which one person is standing. The general speaks on stage, saying that Lart refused to travel to the continent and instead responded with an uprising against their faction. He shouts to people, advising them to take the strongest and deadliest poison they have, as well as the sharpest spears they have. They need to detain Lart at any cost. Calling the young man a vile individual who wanted to take revenge on the owners who raised him, the general says that they will apply a well-deserved punishment to him. Such exclamations, saturated with lies, do not slightly inspire the spirit of the people of the carnivorous faction, who almost began to shout and agree in unison. A few minutes later, we see how Taser and Lart came to the foot of a cliff on which one can see an accumulated and large crowd of carnivores. Lart calmly looks up at the top, and in his gaze you can see how deeply he doesn't care about all those standing at the top and shouting for no reason. The crowd notices Lart and Taser standing below. With spears they ask if he is exactly the same, and what kind of person is standing next to him. Taser also looks up at all those deceived people who came out to fight while he said that they were for their own safety. They led another species to extinction through tricks and cunning, and it is this cunning that everyone from this faction resorts to without fear of anything. This trick forced them to prepare for danger and be as self-centered as possible. This is the driving force behind their combat training. Looking up, both see a crowd of deceived carnivores standing above, waiting for their actions, while the man wants to say something. Taser turns to the guy and says that from today he must concentrate on the present and try to resolve the situation on his own. The teacher also tells the guy that perhaps he, just like Taser himself, felt something incomprehensible, because he does not explain anything. He also tells the guy to focus on his eye, and if he believes in the success of his plan, then everything he wants will certainly come true and he will succeed. Lart's face is filled with rage at those who are standing on the top of the cliff, and his eyes are literally glowing. He says that he will try, speaking to the teacher by name. You can see how the inhabitants of the carnivorous island stand on alert with spears in their hands, looking down at the uninvited guests for them, and also the enemies of the nation. The appearance of the guy not a little angered and embarrassed the general, who called him the lowest bastard from the nature faction who could dare. His gaze is focused on lower Lart, who stands at the bottom of the cliff and walked forward while Taser remains standing behind, giving him a chance to do everything on his own. The general swings his spear while standing on the very edge of the cliff and shouts to the residents to follow the commands of the carnivorous island and finish off the traitor. The general is seriously angry, and in his thoughts his only goal is to create sudden death for the guy standing below, and he uses his skill with a spear. Lart notices this and understands the general's intentions, and his gaze remains absolutely unwavering and cold as liquid nitrogen. The general throws the spear straight down with great force that a ring of air appears around him like an explosion while it is sent down very quickly. The spear is covered with a red aura and flies down towards Larta at great speed, so that the silhouette of the weapon is blurred from the speed at which it is heading into the gorge. Being literally a few tens of centimeters from the head of an imperturbable guy, whose gaze is covered in darkness, not paying attention to anything. The tip of the spear ends up just a few centimeters away from the wide-open eye of the guy, literally burning with his goal without thinking about anything else. Literally a split second before begging for the eyeball, Lart dodges the spear, leaning to the side of it and grabs the weapon that is already flying past. The force of the general's throw was really quite good. The strong friction between the spear and the guy's hand created smoke, showing at what speed it was caught. The guy's face remains as calm and emotionless as ever, but even so it showed all the rage that he had been holding within himself for many years. Looking up, the general and his deputy were dismayed that the guy caught the spear with one hand, and besides, the poison had no effect on him at all. Lart raises the spear above his head and, using only one hand, begins to spin the weapon with enormous force and speed, comparable to the blades. At the moment the guy suddenly stopped twisting the spear in his hand, he stood in the original position of the throw aimed upward, back at the carnivores, and back. Before throwing, he squeezes the spear in his hand, pouring his natural energy into it, which glows with a bright pink light emanating from the guy's fist. Lart throws the spear with brutal force, and the aura was so strong that it formed a small explosion from it, flying straight up around the guy. The general managed to dodge it, but the deputy did not have time and lost his ear, and the spear flew by with such speed that he was not even visible. Behind the backs of the general and the earless deputy, roars, explosions and all sorts of sounds of permission are heard, to which one of the men pays attention. The deputy is holding onto the spot where his ear used to be, bleeding profusely and emitting purple smoke from the area, screaming in pain. Finally, the general turns back to all the noise he heard earlier, and his face, which speaks of confidence in their victory, changes to a grimace of horror. Shocked by the fact that in the stone mountain, a frail poisonous spear left a huge hole, hitting one of the men with poison, causing the deputy to suffocate. Turning to the guy, the general does not understand what happened to him and all the time that has passed since that battle on the same cliff from which he was thrown. But Lart is completely calm, looking up at his enemies, who takes a deep breath and glares with his bright yellow eyes. The guy takes a step while under his heel is his pink natural energy, in the form of an aura, allowing him to stand in the air. Lart's yellow eyes burn with a flame of rage, looking at his opponents, confident in his victory and their complete defeat, and says, catching out loud. Gradually, step by step, the guy begins to rise through the air, as if along the steps as if nothing had happened, while Taser looks on with his arms crossed in his body. A bright pink aura appears under Lart's feet, allowing him to rise higher and higher, appearing like a stable vortex, and looking more professional. The general, like everyone else on the cliff, seeing how the guy simply climbs to the top, walking through the air as if on invisible steps, stands in shock. But the general's cry that all these are just tricks brings all the soldiers to their senses, while he gives the order that everyone should aim poisonous spears at him. At the loud command of the excited and fearful general, all 10 people throw spears straight at Lart with the hope that at least one of them will hit. A volley is fired and 10 spears are sent towards Larta from the side of the cliff at enormous speed, literally not giving any opportunity for any maneuver. At that time, the guy calmly rises through the air and confidently walks, holding himself in control. Looking at the attack that was directed at him, he does the following. Being at first glance in a completely dead-end situation for everyone, he hangs in the air while there are deadly stakes a few meters away from him. But Lart raises his hand, followed by a trail of aura, more like something viscous that stuck to the guy's hand or that he dipped it somewhere. But with this one simple movement, Lart pushed all the spears off the trajectory, continuing his way to the top along invisible steps, to the cliff. All the spears flew down after Lart knocked them all down as if toothpicks were thrown at him by some ants, without paying attention to them. This was noticed by the general, who thought about how the guy threw away all the spears like sticks, while the residents were in shock from this standing behind. Turning to the crowd, the general shouts encouragingly that Lart has resorted to tricks again and it's not scary, you need to throw the spears again. Again, a dozen spears are directed at the guy rising through the air at high speed, leaving behind a trail of a certain aura and air. But Lart, simply not feeling anything, parries the spear with his hand, as if flies were annoyingly flying on his head and buzzing in his ear, preventing him from walking calmly. Lart seemed to be brushing aside the midges that were bothering him, and such behavior on his part made the carnivores simply freeze in fear, awaiting their fate. So, Lart confidently continues to step towards the representatives of the carnivorous faction standing at the top, step by step, and here is the guy. Walking through the air, you can see how close to the cliff he rose, walking along his pink and burning aura-like steps, while some residents rushed to run away. With his completely empty and incredibly scary gaze, Lart looked up, because he didn't need to look where he was stepping, and so, he climbed the cliff of no return. There is a retreat during the training days of the young man, he sits on his knees in a cave, while Taser, putting his hand on his head, tells him to remember all the forgotten experience. Using his electric stun gun on the guy, Taser says that everything that was in the guy's memory will go beyond the boundaries of space and time and will appear as a projection. He will have to study the first memory and follow the truth in order to reveal the core of all his feelings, and thereby become stronger and more confident. While Lart sat with his eyes closed in front of the teacher, he thinks about his words about the first memory, beginning to see that projection. The guy sees how he is in a cart, and he is being taken somewhere to a place unknown to him, namely, representatives of the carnivorous faction. Around a recently born boy, Shell? The boy was still wet from the liquid that surrounded him inside the egg, which was surprising. Taser heard that representatives of the nature faction hatch from an egg and in the body of a 6-year-old child, but it is difficult to believe in the veracity of this. The teacher is also surprised that the guy's sense of hypnosis is as great as his implementation skills, while he begins to shake for an unknown reason. The shaking guy suddenly bursts into tears, which begin to flow from his eyes. Lart says the reason for his tears is the voice for which he yearns. We see how the vice-generals are transporting a cart with little Lart, and how a familiar silhouette notices officers walking along the path. In a voice trembling with sadness with tears in his eyes, he says the name of his brother Larch. This is his older brother who, unfortunately, has been deceased for more than 10 years. On the hill stands a young man with blue, rather massive horns and addresses the vice-general with a question about where they are going so late at night. A guy with a huge bag begins to gradually descend towards the men, who do not understand why he is not yet asleep, and think that he has not finished his work. Larch runs up to the cart in which little Lart lies, and is very surprised, almost shouting about what kind of child is in it. The guy understands that this is a child of the natural faction, just like himself, and is clearly happy about this fact, and a small smile is visible on his face. Sacrifice of the full moon. Representatives of the nature faction hatch from eggs, like lizards or creeping things, which makes them different from people. Immediately after birth, they immediately stand on their feet, like fawns, and they have the same capabilities as a 6-year-old child, a miracle no less. But on the orders of the general of the carnivorous faction, who pointed to an unknown mountain, into which, on his own orders, there were hundreds of unhatched eggs. They were moved underground into a cave, entry into which was strictly prohibited and was punishable by the most severe punishments and more. And some eggs that survived and did not decompose under the influence of the methane lake in the vicinity of which were actually located. They were able to hatch in 4 days despite such disgusting conditions, giving birth to many children of the nature faction, including. Among these was Lart himself, who that day was being transported on a cart to a sacrifice that was held once every 15 years, so Larch saved him from an unenviable fate. Pulling the most fake and nervous smile on his face, the pot-bellied officer couldn't think of anything to say to get out of this situation. The man blatantly lies about the fact that the child washed up on the shore and they were heading to the general to report, and Larch believes it, and he is delighted that he is not the only one. The joyful guy holds on to the car while the man thinks that Lurch has excellent genes compared to other members of his faction. The potential is incredible. And if he really finds out why Lart is being transported in a cart, he will immediately fall into a rage, and for the men this will not end well at all. The next shot we see is how the residents gathered in the general's residence, while he says that the holy anniversary will soon be, and people need to be punished for their sins. However, he notes that acting rashly only means that it will deal a blow to their ancient and sacred traditions. The general says that the child Larch accidentally found out about should be re-educated, and soon should be designated as the next victim for the offering. And the man says that let everyone think about these atrocities against the poor child as their investment in the faction of nature, trying to cover up their sin with good intentions. We are transported to Larcha and Lart, and we understand that the guy's first conscious memory is directly connected with his older and caring brother, albeit not his own. And even in the most difficult times, when the young man was with his brother, these moments were thoroughly marked and filled with genuine happiness. The time before Larch was sacrificed to the predators was truly touching, and with the utmost ease, these memories brought Lart to tears. This experience was enough to motivate the guy to take revenge for the rest of his days. It was the only happy, and therefore precious, memory. The general watched the brothers, saying that in their faction there are only bastards who need to be treated well and they will be obedient and then they will be able to use their power. However, having two subordinates is quite dangerous since they will be difficult to control, and in case of an uprising they will not be able to do anything, thinking out loud. But waving his hand, literally saying, well, to hell with it, the general, with maximum indifference, says to offer another egg for the next sacrifice. And we see how the men dump the newborn with the words of the general that they should not forget to express gratitude to the predators on every full moon. And the sobbing Lart, who began to realize everything that he had experienced again with his eyes closed, tells his teacher that he will become a sacrifice. It was not only destined for him and his brother Lurch to fly down a cliff straight down literally into the clutches of ruthless predators and be devoured. Full of tears, Lart says that every full moon, innocent and defenseless children are sent to certain death by being thrown down the cliff to be eaten. However, Lart stopped crying and we see his gaze filled with the desire for revenge and rage, which is ready to pounce and tear it to shreds. You can see how the guy rose so high that now the separation ledge is up to his waist, and this shows how close the death of the carnivorous people is. Representatives of the carnivorous faction stand in deathly silence, looking at each other, trying to figure out what to do in this situation. But Lart is already stepping on the ledge with one of his feet. He has finally reached the top, and will finally be able to take the revenge he so desired for all his relatives. Literally emitting a strong aura of pink color, it does not seem glamorous, but only oppressive and causes fear in the entire carnivorous people looking at the guy. The general of the carnivorous people standing behind, this shows how cowardly he really is, stands and waits for the enemy's next move with fear in his eyes. Finally, Lart, standing in front of a crowd of excited people, addresses them with the words that they have repeatedly committed terrible and immoral sins. With a depressing atmosphere and showing his intentions, the guy talks about how divine punishment will now overtake everyone present here. Burning with his bright yellow eyes everyone standing, he, with the most oppressive look, says to accept the punishment with all his heart. From such statements, the frightened and angry general screams at the top of his lungs about why everyone worthwhile is afraid of him. He is all alone while there are dozens of them. He shouts for everyone standing to gather and attack the brat at once and at the same time, in order to crush him with numbers since he went out to battle alone. Pointing his finger, the man shouts for the people from the carnivorous faction to show their strength, which ignites the fire of battle and courage in them. The crowd moves with warlike cries, showing their fighting spirit and desire to fight, but certainly not for a good cause. But everything is not so simple. Lart jumps up and begins to spin like a tornado, above the heads of the frozen carnivores, looking at the flying guy. Lart's eyes look only at his goal, which is to mow down everyone standing here, and while he was spinning, he chose his targets and began to defend himself from attacks. With a sharp slashing blow, the guy hits 3 of the carnivorous faction straight, sending them flying to the bottom of the gorge, just as they once sent him. A slashing blow sweeps across the bewildered representatives of the carnivorous faction at the speed of a cruiser flying high in the sky carrying passengers. Lart performs a back kick followed by a trail of bright aura. Some carnivores were barely able to dodge such a quick blow. But there were those who could not do this, and the guy hit with his blow, which looked like an axe blow, and the 3 went flying down the ravine. After the guy's pirouettes, he quickly turns his attention and begins to pull his hand with long and razor-sharp claws to his side. Lart grabs the long-haired guy from the carnivorous faction by the collar of his red clothes, which he apparently did not expect and is not a little worried about. Lart, with eyes glowing with anger, like those of an animal seeing game, makes such a fast movement that his silhouette is very blurred. This movement turned out to be a blow with his hand in the stomach of the carnivore, with which he pierced the guy's belly right through, lifted his entire carcass, swinging at the blow. Turning around while the carnivore's body was still in the air, Lart swings it to throw it, like a bag of sand. The body of the guy, who still did not understand the situation, went flying at an abnormal speed straight in front of Lart who had thrown him. The lifeless body of a long-haired representative of the carnivorous faction hits his relatives and thereby knocks them off their feet straight into a deep gorge. Some time passed until Lart literally committed atrocities and mowed down all representatives of carnivores, standing like a real beast. Many of the residents are afraid to approach Larta, while the general is discussing what he sees and how he feels his power. The remaining crowd stands in confusion, and the general continues to think about what is wrong with Lart and whether he has always been so powerful. Gritting his teeth in anger, the general's face distorted with a bitter admission that if Lart continued to advance, they would be finished. The general also remembers the day when they used a rare poison on a guy in order to save their skins from certain death. But he also notices that they still have a deadly poisonous bomb, which they secretly kept just in case. The man reached behind his back with the thought that if the situation worsened, they would be finished, and decided to use a bomb. Lart stands with his head down, but it's not because he's tired or maybe giving up. He understands that they won't do anything to him and is simply in no hurry. Looking up, one can only see in them the desire to continue the genocide without any pity, but only as revenge for the pain he suffered with his brother and relatives. But suddenly, right in front of Lart's face, a small cylinder appears flying towards the one that diverged in the center, pouring out some liquid. This is the bomb that the general was thinking about. The poison pours onto the face of the guy who did not expect such a move, poisoning him in the most vile way, as always. Immediately after this, the general flies into Lart with his knee forward, delivering an unexpected and strong blow. His boyfriend flies off, but even so, he managed to block it. Literally moving back a little, the guy sits on one knee and tries to come to his senses while the general encourages the crowd that he was able to hit him. The man shouts that whoever kills Lart will be given a reward, and encourages them to dare to show their skills, a cheap provocation. From these words, the entire terrible nature of the carnivorous faction showed itself, cowardly but ruthless, the best words to accurately describe this very nature. When they are in danger, they shake with fear and want to run away from this danger, which was evident when Lart arrived. But if you show weakness, they will attack you like hyenas, as can be seen in the next frame, as a crowd of evil and vile carnivores attack the weakened guy. Truly cunning individuals with whom no one would ever want to have anything in common, since only betrayal and deception will await you from them. One of the carnivores, confident in his abilities, swings at Lart with the words that he is a bastard from the natural faction, but forgot what happened hours ago. A flurry of blows falls on the sitting guy while he just sits and endures how all the arms and legs beat him, and they mock him for the fact that he was raised, but he decided to take revenge. Even more hail fell on the guy who just sat and defended himself, from all those vile faces who kept repeating how he had dishonored such a noble and high-ranking carnivorous faction, and of course they were not going to stop all those beatings that were clearly visible at a high altitude. While many blows hit all parts of the guy's body, and he heard wishes for death and reproaches for him to apologize, he was just waiting for the moment. And so, the guy's eyes again lit up with a yellow light, which showed that the guy had not lost his strength as he had when he was poisoned and thrown into the gorge. With a sharp movement, Lart jumps out from the middle of the crowd, and a trail of aura trails behind him. This made the crowd stop and look up in shock. Making incredible pirouettes in the air, like an acrobat, the guy flies away from the crowd. Only the sound of Sonic from the game of '96 is not enough to substitute. Landing a few dozen meters from the crowd, Lart emits a strong aura as onlookers begin to turn towards their victim. Enraged people turned to the guy and started shouting that he wouldn't be able to escape and showered him with insults, as they always do. But he had no intention of running away. He was not from the carnivorous faction like all those spineless ones in front of him, and certainly not weaker than that entire crowd. Making a dash towards the crowd, the guy brings his hands back a little and connects them, making something like a ball of aura between them, looking at his enemies. The aura-cleaving blow sweeps through the air and explodes with pink light, hitting 3 more and sending them flying away from the battlefield. That powerful blow is followed by another one that covers the area next to the guy like fire, sending several more enemies flying. People from the crowd noticed something was wrong as Lart mowed them down as if nothing had happened, and they couldn't believe their eyes. After all, the guy was smarter than all the fearful carnivores and lured them all to the edge of the cliff, and with his blows filled with aura, threw everyone down a huge cliff. One of the crowd understands that it was precisely in order for them all to fall down that Lart allowed himself to be beaten, to kill all the birds with one stone. But while he was thinking about this, one can see how the guy's hand, surrounded by a pink aura, is directed towards the standing carnivore at an inadequate speed. Such a strong blow literally almost pierced the enemy right through, and thus, when Lart's hand was still raised, the opponents were already flying down the cliff. And the only thing that remained for the carnivores flying down was to scream and emit fountains of blood from Lart's blows while he stood and looked on. Surrounded by opponents, the guy does not show any emotions, and in his eyes you can only see a crazy rage that knows no end and gives strength. Once again, the nature of the carnivorous faction is shown by the guy who screams that he needs to run and hide from Lart, seeing all his strength. From the huge crowd of carnivores, there were less than a dozen left, and 2 of them rushed to flee past Lart, shouting about what was needed in the village, but it was not so easy. Lart raises his hand with 2 fingers extended upward, from which a powerful aura emanates, as if pink fire, accumulating power to strike. Clenching his fist, something similar to a laser beam 2 meters long begins to shoot out of it, which looked unstable and fluctuated in structure all the time. It was catching. After this, the guy swung his fist with a beam of aura, looking at those trying to escape with contempt, showing all his hatred. Lart quickly hits with his hand, followed by a laser to his side, creating a literal wall of aura in the form of fire, not giving even a chance to escape, forcing the 2 to stop. Having noticed such an impassable wall, the man and the guy realized that there was nowhere to run, and they definitely didn't like this outcome, but they couldn't do anything about it. But Lart, in a calm and cold voice, tells all the carnivores how lucky he is, because today is the full moon, and they are definitely not heading to the village. We see the cliff from the bottom up, covered in haze and fog, literally draining the ominousness and feeling of complete helplessness to climb up. The guy tells everyone on the cliff that they will fly straight down into the cliff, as they did with everyone from the nature faction, with glowing eyes. There is a retreat again where we see Taser covered with powerful lightning, white as snow, and we are told about a certain ecosystem. As such, it is a set of cycles that emit or absorb the energy of the body. Apparently this is what happens in the body of the Taser of the Electro faction. And we also see a certain battery called current charge, and it can also be consumed in its original form and also without any embodiment. And the still section called an island called Yahello will revive its clan, and all this is still unknown to us. Later the truth will be revealed. But Taser has expended a lot of energy on martial arts transmission and maintains the state of economy as much as possible. After all, the main task is to prepare for the battle with hordes of predators on the island of Yahello, and we see how Taser stands in the air thinking about saving resources. But his image becomes as gloomy as possible from no less gloomy thoughts about who really are the owners of Yahello Island, since they are not carnivores. And they are none other than hundreds of animals called predators, who are united by a common mind into a huge communication web. And all this web has a certain back armor of which is a certain beast different from ordinary ones, the name of this miracle without feathers, Nathan. And Lart thinks about the teacher that he has the minimum necessary energy to confront the enemy, but only if he calculates the nuances. But for now, he cannot use it, and therefore, the most reasonable thing would be to maintain the energy saving mode to save maximum energy. And while the guy must fight and win alone and in the same way, they need to prepare for the battle with the predatory monsters that live on Yahello. It can be seen that night has long fallen on the cliff, and many people are standing on its edge, opposite one Lart standing closer to the base. The carnivores, afraid of their fate, are trying to somehow dissuade Lart by saying that he was chosen by the unanimous decision of the clans on the general full moon. They tell him to go to sleep and enjoy life in the hope that the guy will buy it and let them go alive, and the whole crowd agrees with the man. He is also told to think about whether he can maintain stability on the continents after a certain armistice day on the island of Yahello. People from the crowd try to blame others for everything and say that all this is due to an ingenious communication system on the Yahello island itself. Listening to all this, the guy standing in front of the crowd with a cold and indifferent look and blood flowing from his head, simply remains silent, looking into nowhere. But gritting his teeth, he gives the crowd a chance to talk, saying that locking them in a pigsty and forcing them to do dirty work is not enough for them. And with a bit of irony, he says that newborn children who do not know how to walk and are unable to protect themselves become a gift. This is very cruel. But the most indifferent response is heard from the crowd, since this is a tradition, and at that moment the ground under the guy's feet shook from his powerful aura. The guy's face was covered with visible veins on his forehead, and his hair stood up due to all the aura that emanates from him, and he screams furiously in response to the words. Lart raises his hands up, palms facing the sky, and crosses them as he is covered from head to toe, a pink aura creating an oppressive atmosphere in the air. While in this position, the amount of aura coming out of the guy increases significantly while the guy addresses the crowd with a furious voice. He clenches his teeth and gives out something like a groan, as if trying to lift something incredibly heavy. Apparently he is preparing some kind of attack. The crowd wonders what he is doing, and many also realize that they cannot rush forward and calmly attack due to not understanding what kind of attack it is. The guy is literally groaning from a certain heaviness that he feels while holding his hands in this way and trying to do something, but it is not yet clear what exactly. However, the same boy who is trying to escape to the village shouts for everyone to look up, pointing his finger at the sky with shock on his face. Not high in the sky, something similar to a cloud of huge sakura petals appears with many of them looking down as if they were thorns. Everyone at once raised their heads up to see this huge cloud. At that moment everyone seemed to have a lump in their throat and no one understood what it was. But soon, it became noticeable that this something was flying to the ground, which made many shout about it. No one understood what to do and how to avoid the fate. At that moment, Lart lowered his hands to the ground, causing the entire surrounding aura to fall to the ground like an explosion surrounding him all. Inexorable doom loomed in the form of a huge glowing pink cloud, causing people to panic and attempt to escape in hopes of survival. But before they could do anything, the cloud fell onto a cliff 7 meters from the people, forming a wall of fire that prevented everyone behind it from leaving. Soon thinking that they were not in danger, the crowd began to taunt Lart, who used a slow burst attack and missed. And one of the men approached the wall from the guy's aura, saying out loud that he was going to stop everyone on the cliff with a barrier, asking if this was so. The barrier was truly enormous. At least 10 meters wide and about 15 high, a huge amount of aura that blocked everyone's exit. Bringing his hand to the barrier, the man, believing in his own strength, mockingly says out loud that he will simply have to break the barrier in front of him. He swings with a characteristic cry, so that Lart or the barrier would bite out, but nothing happens and the barrier repels the man's hand like a feather. Another man from the crowd hypothesizes that Lart is exhausted and has no energy left, and the barrier will hold until he collapses from exhaustion. The guy really looks tired and is trying to catch his breath after such a strong attack, so the man suggests that everyone just wait. And with an ominous face, he says that when his strength runs out, it really excites him, and here again his vile nature shows itself in full glory. A guy sitting on one knee, with crossed arms pressed to the ground, tries to catch his breath, greedily gasping for air with his mouth, but to no avail. And a man from the crowd notices this, saying that the guy is barely breathing and in this state he can only block the path. Time is on their side. However, Lart does not intend to give up and clenches his fists, scratching the ground he holds with both hands, showing his intentions to win and take revenge. With his teeth clenched, the guy begins to be enveloped by his aura. The question arises how much of it he has in general, and he says the word grab. Raising both hands, he does not stand up and swings at the blow with both hands at the same time directly towards the ground while the aura becomes thicker. Making a sharp blow in the air, rapid movements of his hands send out trails of a bright pink aura, and the guy pronounces anchor trigger. The guy's huge barrier literally pierces the earth's solid surface, releasing itself on the other side of the cliff, cutting off the ledge like a piece of cheese with a knife. The taser felt strong vibrations coming from Lart's impact, which had just cut off a huge amount of earth and stones, changing the landscape of the island. A bunch of carnivores didn't even have time to understand how they began to fall straight down along with the entire cliff, looking at Lart who had jumped further away. Everyone standing on the other side of the barrier finally noticed that the ground under their feet began to crumble and fall down along with them. The crowd of representatives of the carnivorous faction began to scream, unable to change anything, fearing that they would fall into the jaws of the predators if they fell. But still, they couldn't change anything since they couldn't walk on air or use catching, and Lart just stood and watched as people fell into the ravine. The taser is still in some kind of darkness, and reasons that holding back the emotions of anger can easily kill several predators at a time. And Taser is surprised by the fact that the implementation and application of the acquired skills over all this time has exceeded all expectations given to him. Putting 2 fingers to his forehead, Taser talks about leaving the energy-saving mode. It turns out that all this darkness that enveloped him was this very mode. Removing his hand, Taser simply stands and waits. One can see how the darkness in front of him begins to disperse, shedding the bright night light of the moon on his silver face. The darkness completely retreated and allowed all the bright light to illuminate the entire silver warrior so that he could see how Lart coped with his task. The guy is trying to catch his breath after a heavy attack, and this is an annoying fight with a gang of pissers and scoundrels who are only waiting for mistakes from him. However, something attracts Lart's attention, causing him to open his eyes wider, looking straight down into the gorge where he just sent the rock with the people. Looking down, he sees many corpses pinned down by huge boulders and simply those who fell to death due to the not-so-high strength of the body. Incredibly quickly and with obvious anxiety about some reason, he turns his gaze to the opposite direction, scouring his eyes. On the other side, he sees almost the same picture: corpses, boulders, blood, intestines. Well, that is, nothing different, and most people are different and that's all. Again he turns his gaze to the other side, now with obvious anger and misunderstanding on his face, and continues to scour his keen eye for some detail. Also, corpses foaming at the mouth, blood, severed or pinned limbs, broken and dislocated limbs, but everything is not right, something is wrong. Turning his gaze again, Lart realizes that something is wrong, something important is clearly missing, something that he hasn't been paying attention to all the time is missing. But what was missing was precisely the Commander-in-Chief Org, who was nowhere to be seen between the rubble and corpses of all those who fell into the gorge along with the rock. Gritting his teeth in anger, the guy finally realizes that this vile bastard is nowhere to be found, which means that when the crowd attacked him, he ran away like a coward. You can see how Taser and Lart are literally rushing along some mountain path, followed by long trails of white lightning and a pink aura. Together with the angry guy, Teacher Taser is also running towards the village, apparently as unshakable and calm as a boa constrictor. Taser talks about a certain ring that he must get from the island of Yahello, where he is now, and be with Lart running on his right hand. He also thinks about Orga, who is famous for his cruelty, and was afraid that the warehouse might be set on fire or destroyed, but it is completely intact. The man tells Lart that they need to run even faster to the village, and he finds his teacher and runs not far from him straight to the village. They run together at great speed, rather comparable to sports cars, but not Usain Bolt. He simply would not keep up with them. The angle switches to a close-up of the face of the person running with the help of his snow-white taser lightning, and he and the guy were heading straight to the village, like here. A certain purple-pink mist appears near Taser's nose, a typical poisonous gas in all its glory, and he, of course, notices this gas. The man immediately stops in front of Lart and raises his hand in front of him to stop him, also shouting for him to stop immediately. With an unnatural look of concern, and shouts that she and the guy are flying upstairs, which is more than reasonable for their situation. Both immediately jump as high as they can, literally jumping out of all the gas that could have completely swallowed them into itself. They immediately stand on certain platforms created from their electricity and aura, right above a huge purple cloud. A slightly discouraged guy asks the teacher what kind of cloud this is. In the middle of the night, for no reason, this whole glamorous cloud appeared. Taser and Lart stand quite high in the sky on their own, as if on small islands, and Taser answers the guy that these are gases from black ores. You can see how a huge amount of gas literally becomes fog and absorbs all the land beneath them into a continuous poisonous curtain of purple color. The Taser understands that this smoke is produced by strong grinding of raw materials, and this amount is enough to envelop the island of Yahello and the surrounding land together. The man explains to Lart that the point is not to confront the predators with the help of this gas, since, unlike the inhabitants of the Garth, the predators have nothing to do with it. Having realized the seriousness of the situation, Lart understands that all this chaos is with a poisonous fog and literally entails the genocide of any living creature. Its essence is the murder of the Garths, since not only he and Lart are susceptible to the gas, so are representatives of the carnivorous faction who did not go to the cliff with everyone else. Org clearly already had some expectations regarding the current situation and had planned to sacrifice them along with them from the very beginning. A guy looking from a height at a village shrouded in smoke says that it is quiet and calm, no one or anything can be seen or heard. The taser talks about how obvious it is that, in addition to those carnivores, there are many more, some were covered with gas, and some were hiding in a secluded place. Thoughtful, Lart talks about a certain bunker. It's not in vain that he lived in this place for more than 16 years, which means he has an idea where the rest of the carnivores are. He remembers that same underground storage facility, in a cave with limited access, only such a large number of individuals could fit there. The taser notices that there is more and more gas in the air, and roughly estimates that there will be enough water for more than 3 days, so it's possible to live in principle. Also, there are also limits to the gas concentration, and energy continues to be consumed, so they need to hurry and invade the bunker as quickly as possible. Taser calls Lart, telling him to follow him, to which he responds positively and calls him Commander, with a hint of jokes and even joy. The men began to run through the air, straight towards that same bunker, while Taser thought that the bunker was locked, but could be unlocked. While he runs along his platforms of lightning, he hopes that the door will be made of conductive material and can be destroyed. You can see how they are running together above all that fog that has filled the entire island, enveloping the entire village along with the nearby forest and mountains, leaving a trail behind them. But for a moment, Lart slows down, and as if noticing something, begins to walk much slower, despite the fact that they were about to run into the bunker. Noticing this, Taser also slows down and asks the guy walking behind him what's going on, while he just calmly walks forward and watches. Noticing something ahead, the guy silently looks at it in the distance, trying to understand what he actually sees, maybe org or something else. On the rock you can see a girl who is shaking with fear while she is almost completely enveloped in fog from all sides, and has almost reached her. Noticing this, Lart's bloodstained eye literally narrows at that girl, capturing her with his gaze, and one can see how strong his rage is. The girl was wearing torn rags, dirty hair, somewhat similar to Lart's hair when he was a slave. She was shaking and asking for help, hugging her legs. Seeing this picture, Lart rushed as quickly as he could and even could not. His face showed rage and a desire to save the child from death. Gritting his teeth in anger, he picks up the girl and instantly jumps off the rock with incredible strength, returning back to Taser and saving her from the poison. She is breathing very heavily and she is just trying to catch her breath. You can see how the poor child is simply exhausted. She is dirty and tortured. Having changed his face, Lart tries to calm the distressed girl, and not a trace of aggression remains on his face. It has become soft and kind. The girl's legs were shackled in iron shackles, and her feet were completely black with purple cracks from which poison oozed. Her legs crumbled. The guy literally shows a grin from his sharp fangs, and his face is distorted due to the rage overwhelming him. He shouts the name of the general and shakes while holding back. Events move to a certain area where a large number of people have gathered, where the general asks if everyone is here, since the entire faction has been gathered. It is held on by a valve that apparently leads directly to the bunker itself, which Lart and Taser want to get into. However, no, this is what released all the gases of the Black Horse to freedom, which is what the general is thinking about, cursing Lart, whom he underestimated. Also adding the fact that Taser himself joined him, then even 6 certain dynasties walking side by side could not defeat them in an equal battle. Org hopes that his plan will succeed, it will work, and decides that for now, they will be able to hide in that reliable and large bunker for some time. And remembering the numerous complaints about himself, he thinks that he will take advantage of the situation to get rid of everyone who wanted to take his place. And so, he will remain the only one, the strongest in the entire faction. In his thoughts, of course, he cleared his throat and prepared to speak in public. The general begins to shout to the audience standing at the bottom of the slope with stone steps, surrounded by a fence, that the time has come for something. A monologue begins about ancestors who survive thanks to the right decisions in difficult situations, and finally they need to make the right choice. The org shouts to the people below that everyone should cast aside their fears and start acting, since nothing is more important than life, inciting the crowd of onlookers with his words. Remembering all the atrocities that his family and he himself did, how they poisoned the natural faction and fed children to the predators, he says that they will write their own history. Pointing his finger back, he says that everyone here is the chosen one, and they must go to the bunker on the mountain, thereby saving themselves from the gases of the black ores. Even though the plan had many dangers, who are the chosen ones? But the main thing is to survive, and it was this speech that was ideal for carnivores filled with vanity. The person walking in front said that everyone behind him should hurry up, since they had little time, and the whole crowd shouted back in agreement with the words. But the one who walked almost last with org drew attention to the working girl and asked what to do with her, leave her to work in the fields. Having looked with him at their slave, the general thinks for a few moments with a completely indifferent face, but after a long silence, he, with the most ominous look, recalls the strangeness of the girl, that she constantly scratches the rocks if she is not busy with work, which everyone noticed. The man who remembered her said that even though he might be rude, for some reason this girl does not look like some kind of scammer, but it's not clear exactly how. But when the gas spreads, it will still disappear so that there will be no trace left, so why should they care, especially since replacing it is easy and simple. So, with his eyes full of how indifferent the general is to the fate of the girl, he says to leave her here and the matter will be resolved, but only for them. And here is the result of the decision without a humane general, a child with crumbling legs filled with poison, to be in the arms of Lart, who saved her. Holding the wounded girl in his arms, he is shaking from all the anger that overwhelms him, but he restrains himself, for the sake of whose child he is holding. Standing behind, Taser addresses Larta with an intonation of regret, while the guy tries to hold back his anger by clenching his sharp teeth. Turning around, the guy talks about the girl's legs, and tries not to succumb to emotions, so he speaks intermittently, and talks about what they need. But before he can finish speaking, the mentor comes up to him and gently places his metal hand on the leg of the girl who suffered from the poisonous gas of black ores. Taser says that now they are in danger and the gas is everywhere. Because of it, open areas of the body immediately begin to rot. The girl will have a hard time. From such news, Lart's face instantly changes towards regret and sadness mixed with resentment and anger, because he's just a child. How can this be? But such a difficult moment is interrupted by a strange sound coming from the side of the man, and they turn their heads in his direction in order to see what created him. Taser says that they have very little time, and they urgently need to take this wounded child to the bunker, where she will be safe. Fully motivated to achieve maximum speed, the guy agrees with the teacher, and from his look it is clear that his intentions have not changed at all. They wasted no time and headed straight towards that very bunker at maximum speed, along with the wounded girl. But the guy understands that no matter how fast they run, the gas still spreads in the air no slower and only gains momentum. And also, he notices that, due to fast running, as well as such energy-consuming walking in the air, which, of course, is not surprising and certainly not easy. The guy describes being tired, having to carry a 10,000 pounds log in the air. He's completely exhausted and that's his limit. Taser thinks the same way, thinking that his limit is half a day, and for them now every second is more valuable than oil for the USA and gold for the gypsy on the street. But Lart distracts him from his thoughts with a loud exclamation that he finally sees that very treasured bunker, which is not so far away. You can see how all the nearby forests, mountains, paths are completely shrouded in gas, and there are only a few tens of meters left for him to reach the bunker. This is also noticed by Taser, who says that the gas is already very close, saying in these words that they simply must hurry. The man shouts that he needs to hurry and that Lart should not stop even for a moment, since the gas is very close to the gate, there is a chance of not making it in time. Immediately flying up to the door, Taser uses his electricity to open the shutter and reaches out to the huge door itself. He stops his hand a few centimeters from the door and sends electrical energy into it to find out what material it is made of. He understands that this is an ancient and high-tech bunker, that you will never open it with physical force in your life, you don't even have to think about it. But fortunately for them, the door is made of conductive material, so there is no need to worry about gas getting inside. It is completely reliable in this regard. And besides, Taser talks about the strange lock on the door, which is fastened on the bottom and top sides with supermagnetic force, which sounds reliable. And he notices that even if the door opens by accident, it certainly won't remain in this position for long, thanks to this very magnetic force. Starting to use more energy, the man shouts to Lart that while he was holding the door, he slipped into the bunker and completed the goal, and asks again. A little confused, the guy, still with the girl in his arms, agrees with the master, but he does not look calm, apparently worried about the master. Sighing like an old fart, Taser attempts to open the door with his electricity, using this power on the structure of the door itself. Crouching in front of a huge door that looks more like a wall, the man fires a large charge into the structure with the motive of opening it, rather than sitting outside with gas. The taser rotates his hand with his fingers spread in different directions clockwise, causing a funnel-shaped twist pattern to appear on the metal. A charge of white current completely covers the door from the outside and causes the lock located in the middle to start spinning and open the huge damper. The door opens slightly, completely covered with electricity and with the magnetic lock released. Apparently this is all that the taser can do at the moment. Holding his hands on each of the slightly open parts of the door, preventing them from closing, the man shouts at Lart to immediately jump inside the bunker. Having heard the command from the mentor, Lart agrees and begins to move with the girl in his arms towards the open door into a safe bunker for her. Using his aura, the guy makes a quick dash through the slightly open door and the electricity stretches out like strands of a spider's web while the taser holds the door. Turning to the teacher, the guy shouts for him to jump inside after him, worried about whether he will have time to jump into such a small gap in the open doors. The taser makes a literally lightning-fast dash into the bunker at great speed, so as to be sure to get into it before the door slams shut. And right before closing, using aura, he manages to jump inside the structure, which means that now they are safe from the gas. The door slams sharply and loudly under the influence of the magnetic force that the man spoke about earlier, and thus cuts off the way out and, of course, from the gas. But Taser's speed was not perfect, but rather barely, since he left half of his cloak in the door along with pipes that looked like hair. Lart notices a bright and warm light at the end of the tunnel, which he talks about, but the man tells him not to rush and it is better to move as slowly as possible. Walking slowly along the corridor, the guy notices that it is surprisingly hot in this place, as he approaches the unknown light emanating from there. Coming closer, Lart has a question about why such an ominous atmosphere can be seen in such a place, where it should be safe. Both heroes notice that beyond the threshold and the corridor everything is engulfed in flames, which is why they were not a little surprised and froze for a while in shock. The only one who did not freeze in shock was the girl who was being held by Lart. She jumped up sharply from his arms, and even despite her terribly wounded legs. The little girl begins to run straight into the flames, causing the heroes to fall even more in shock from the reckless actions of the wounded little girl. Literally jumping forward into the fire with her hands and risking her life, she manages to save 2 eggs covered with a black substance, which apparently burns well, from the fire. Having time to react, Taser tells the girl to take care of herself, and quickly pulls it away, covering it with herself, further away from the high tongues of furious flame. Noticing that the girl's hands are something other than eggs, the man is surprised that eggs of the natural faction can do anything here at all. After all, this is a bunker, however. The realization dawns on him, and not believing in the veracity of these thoughts, he looks in horror straight into the flames, holding the girl with the eggs she saved. Taser understands that this is nothing more than a place for storing eggs, or rather it was called such once. Now there is only a flame that has engulfed thousands of eggs. Realizing that everything has burned to the ground, they stand pressed against the wall, realizing that there is no escape route. Death on the street, death ahead, excellent choice, give 2. The flame had already managed to reach the exit through which they came here, which means that even if they wanted to escape to certain death in the gas, they could not. This means that this is a trap. Taser is holding the girl, while Lart looks in horror at this entire field of fire that has engulfed all of his relatives combined. An evil laugh sounds. Enjoying this picture, the heroes raise their heads towards the laughter they just heard in order to understand who it is. In the former egg storage area, completely enveloped in flames, a strange ledge with a large cutout under glass is visible from above, in which silhouettes of people can be seen. One of these silhouettes is the Commander-in-Chief Org, who stands with a smile from ear to ear and revels in how cruel a thing he has just done. Noticing this madman, Lart was no longer able to restrain all the aggression that he had accumulated, and his face called out all his pain and anger. The general says that the existence of the nature faction in itself is already a disaster for the carnivorous faction, which sounds like a vile fear. And the man calls this whole nightmare the fact that it was necessary to destroy any inclinations of chaos, which, as it turns out, is what he is doing now, which he likes. Unable to tolerate all the nonsense and lies, the guy interrupts by shouting his name, with an aura glowing from his clenched fist, and swings for a blow. With a wave of his hand, the guy sends forward a powerful cloud of aura that hits the glass behind which they are hiding, from the fire and Lart and Taser themselves. But at Lart's attempts to take revenge, the general burst into laughter, because the inside of the bunker consists of high-strength titanium, no heat, no current. The general quickly studied the place and thinks that now he will be able to destroy everything, because the bunker will be filled with fire along with poisonous gas. The psycho is delighted. Under the ominous laughter of the commander-in-chief, Lart, in a rage, begins to pour blows on the glass from afar, in the hope that he will be able to do something. Reveling in pride in the fact that he is safe, the man with a smile on his face wishes our heroes to spend the rest of their lives in pain. But the guy simply doesn't hear all those words, and furiously continues to strike blow after blow, despite the fact that earlier he was ready to fall from exhaustion. Lart's rampage is stopped by the mentor who grabbed him by the shoulder, with a clear order that he stop the rampage and unnecessary waste of energy. The guy is out of breath and completely exhausted, sweat pours from his face and he can't breathe enough, but only groans from fatigue. Falling to his knees, the guy unsuccessfully tries to catch his breath in a room where the fire is consuming all the oxygen, which looks funny and scary at the same time. Lart finally begins to think. He spent all his energy, and Taser even more so, and now not only the flame, but also the gas began to spread. Well, that's it. However, Taser, squeezing the last juice out of himself, activates the plasma field and closes him, the girl and Lart in a cage made of lightning, protecting him from the flames. Multiple webs of electricity protect everyone inside from the spreading flame, keeping it a few centimeters away from people. In this situation, Taser understands that there is no longer any point in accumulating energy, and he is obliged to fight for life until his last breath and movement. He spends everything. The guy, barely sitting on his knee, asks Taser for permission on some occasion, and his voice seems to have changed and became different from before. The guy's behavior surprised the mentor, while he behaved strangely and unnaturally, saying something about this electric field, sitting on a log looking down. He calls the teacher sharply, as if he doesn't promise attention or is far away, or maybe he's just joking, but definitely not in such and such a situation. The guy says that everything melts from such a high temperature in a closed place. Well, thank you Captain for the obvious, it was not clear to us in Taser. Lart raises his hand up on his knees and says that this place is unbearably stuffy, and he assertively says that this urgently needs to be corrected. The guy says that you need to pull the lever in the room and then, using the native laws of physics, the flame will be sucked in due to the strong pressure drop. Lart's last aura begins to shine from the 2 fingers of his raised hand, towards that same lever, and the guy calls this attack warming ray. From the hand surrounded by an aura, a thin beam begins to appear, moving upward diagonally, which went beyond the plasma field and entered the fire. Holding his hand up, Lart feels any movement and vibration of the beam. He tells himself in his thoughts that he should be more accurate, squeezing out the last of his strength. The beam reaches the wall on the other side of the bunker and begins to heat it up so much that sparks begin to fly from it and literally melt. Feeling all his weakness, the guy does not give up and literally shouts at himself in his thoughts so that his beam is further, so that it can break through the wall. And then, the guy feels that a super hot ray begins to pass through the wall that was previously called not subject to heat and current in general. Looking at the guy's efforts, Taser thinks that Lart uses the energy exchange and controls it, but still, it can be dangerous. In his eyes you can see the incorruptible shock of what is happening, and he asks himself about what kind of cancer. He needs to understand what is happening to Lart. Being in full concentration and controlling every action, Lart stands motionless, absorbing the energy of the Taser, with his arm outstretched and his eyes closed. A sign is visible that tells us that Lart is now the leader of the tribe of gods and his S-class realization has not escaped anywhere, and is using it to the fullest. Inside the safe room in which all the remaining representatives of the carnivores were located, a light begins to be visible next to the lever, which is noticed. The guy, having said catching, is in full concentration and empty, lifeless eyes open, showing how tired the guy is and is now suffering. Still in shock, Taser holds the girl in his arms, and finally realizes that the lever in the room can be opened from a short distance, looking at Lart. Looking at how the guy with a clenched fist holding the lever is trying and shaking, he calls Lart the leader of the tribe of gods, which he has become. The eyes, are filled with shock and even joy and pride, because the guy is not without a gift, and the potential is simply unique and colossally huge. After Lart's actions, a red stone began to glow in the room with the carnivores, similar to an alarm, which they noticed and wondered why. Turning away from the much-loved spectacle of burning, the general says that everyone should check the switchgear and lever again. However, his face is covered with veins from the anger and horror that he experienced when he turned and saw what was happening behind his back and the backs of others. You can see how the lever covered with an aura stretches towards the opening, but the chains hung on it interfere with it, and the general, seeing this, shouts about the lever at the top of his voice. Turning completely to the people, his face is covered with veins, and his eyes are capillaries from anger and worry about what might happen, and he screams to grab him. The crowd immediately runs up to the glowing lever, stretching out its hands to it, afraid of what makes it glow so much, but more afraid of the opening of the valve. Many hands grab the lever with a death grip, not allowing it to move, but it is not so easy. Everyone is pulling with all their might, but it does not give in. The cowardly commander-in-chief, who was proud of the fact that he was the strongest, stands on the sidelines shouting that everyone should be patient because their lives depend on it. The guy, gritting his teeth, endures all the force that holds back the lever, preventing the valve from opening. His hand shakes from the tension, but the weakened guy holds on. The crowd holding the lever doesn't understand how the guy does it alone. Their hands are bloody from how they pull the lever too hard and resist Larta. The lever literally explodes with aura and moves forward a little, despite how many people try to pull it in the opposite direction. The commander-in-chief, who does not understand what is happening, stands apart from the crowd and cannot believe what he sees, sweating from fear and anxiety. Biting his lower lip in anger, he does not understand how Lart even manages to pull the lever only because of the help of the titanium and what is going on there. All the memories flash in my head one after another, how the plump vice-general, smiling, showed the swill with his brother's horn floating in a jar. He sees that moment is sitting in the closet, he notices this, and at that moment the realization comes to him that his beloved brother is now not on another continent. He sees in front of him a picture that he did not see himself, but only heard how his brother with a severed horn and poison falls straight into the clutches of the predator. Then he sees the moment when he was poisoned, killing that same fat man, and the guy could not move normally to avenge his older brother. The guy sees the very moment when he was poisoned, thereby allowing him to go through the process of becoming a mature individual, which he could not previously achieve on his own. That very moment when two vile men, the general and his sycophant, with the help of bamboo spears, drove him to the cliff like a cow and threw him off. The same feeling in sight when he fell backwards into the depths of the gorge, looking at how the barely surviving men, who had taken everything and everyone from him, gloated. The way he saw a girl sitting and abandoned on a mountain, no one needed and asking for help, who was used just like him, thrown out like garbage. And that most terrible sight, like all the hidden eggs of his faction with a huge number of unhatched children, burned to the ground only because of the general's desire. Everything he remembers is imbued with anger and rage, the desire to kill everyone and take revenge for everything that he and his family had to endure. This gives him strength. Filled with energy from Lart's strong emotions of anger, the hand literally swells and begins to glow more intensely, tearing all the clothes on itself to shreds. The lever, which almost all the villagers were barely holding, suddenly and decisively begins to move towards opening the doors, despite everyone who is holding it. A damper with many cuts begins to let air inside itself, and gradually heat begins to flow into the safe room. The general, who is looking at what is happening with horror, begins to shake with horror, because the door will open and escaping using tricks will definitely not work here. But despite his ego and pride, he humbly closes his eyes and lowers his head, realizing that he is lost and he definitely will not get out of here alive. The guy begins to move his hand more confidently, and he begins to pull it in his direction in order to finally open that valve and let all the fire into it. Sitting on one knee, Lart pulls his hand as far back as possible, squeezing out all his strength, and a huge fountain of bright pink aura surrounded by current flows from his hand, breaking all the chains holding it and breaking out of the hands of many people and nailing others to the floor. The lever with a quick movement finally opens the door to the room. The damper finally hurries to open because the lever is pulled in the right direction, and all the fire begins to stretch towards the previously safe room. Screams are heard that the dome is open and that everyone should be careful, while Taser, still in a state of shock, looks up, realizing that Lart has succeeded. A massive pillar of flame headed straight into the dome where all the carnivores who lived on this island for many years and also committed atrocities are located. Many residents began to scream in horror that the hatch was incredibly quickly sucking flames into itself, causing the dome to gradually fill completely with fire. As the flames were absorbed into the dome, and as it became more and more, the screams of carnivores enveloped in fire being burned alive could be heard. Lart and Taser had a view of how all the fire gradually moved into the dome in front of them, causing the window in it to glow like the sun. And then the moment came when the fire was completely absorbed into the dome hatch and now it was visible only from the window and the open dome, and then only a little. The Taser, who caught up, shouted to the guy to quickly close the entrance to the hell that was going on in the dome, so that the fire would remain only there. With the last of his strength, Lart sharply pushes his hand up diagonally and thereby follows the laser from it through the wall, gradually weakening it. With a loud knock of metal on metal, the door slams shut tightly, leaving only something like smoke from the flames that are inside with the carnivores. Smoke and heat spread throughout the cave from the fire that was recently in it, moving into the safety of the dome, making it shine like a decorated Christmas tree. And in that inferno, we see how Org, completely enveloped in flames, stands and looks out the window, accepting his fate, but because of the painful shock, he feels nothing. Looking at how the weakened Lart lowers his swollen hand down while in the taser field, and he talks about how annoying he is. Due to the fact that everything he did, albeit in a poisonous way, was destroyed while in the flames and the only thing visible from him was his eye. Falling completely covered in fire, he thinks that everything was destroyed because of some bastard, and finally Org is dead. Lart succeeded. Lart, choking, barely holds her hand clenched into a fist at her lowered position and tries to swallow air after such an exhausting battle for her life with Taser. Taking a breath, the guy begins to fall face forward from powerlessness. He has completely squeezed out all his strength and juices, he just needs rest. Everyone has a limit. A deceased, caring brother appears before his eyes, who asks him if he is hungry, because he brought him something, holding food in his hands. Being a few centimeters from the floor unconscious, Lart only addresses his brother as Hyun, remembering him with longing and sadness in his soul. And like a sack of potatoes, the guy fell straight face down with a characteristic slap, while Taser just shouted his name, standing and looking at how he was lying. Looking at the guy, the teacher can see how proud he is of his student. He turns off the plasma field technique since the threat has passed, only thanks to Larta. Holding a girl with eggs of the natural faction in his arms, he places his hand on the back of the unconscious young man, who has received the much-desired rest. He looks like a sleeping child, if you don't take into account the blood coming from the head and many different wounds and dirt, but the main thing is that they survived and are intact. Remembering what happened, Lart's body could barely cope with the internal strength. He embodied the highest level ring energy compression technique. And just like that, his actions and words seem to be beyond his control, and immediately after that, something comes to his mind, as if he were shooting. The image of a maiden immediately pops up in my head talking about some object called Great Decal, and certainly not like a fairy tale or all kinds of rumors. It tells about a certain symmetrical universe, like butterfly wings woven from space itself, which has the majestic name Decal. Venus knows that there is a possibility that when beings located at different points in space meet, for some reason, their simultaneous presence at any point in space can lead to disastrous consequences and cause chaos and destruction in that place. But continuing her story to Taser, the maiden says that this is just a hypothesis taken from the sacred scriptures. The exact consequences are not known to anyone. Remembering these words of Venus, Taser sitting in the cave thinks about the possibility of whether this is what the unknown vines mentioned a long time ago. In addition, Lart brought his body to complete exhaustion, and it is not surprising that he fainted, and being in this state he lies for quite some time. After all, the second day had already begun when the black or gas that had enveloped the entire island and its vicinity began to dissipate. There were only 3 days left to endure. Having spoken out loud the thoughts that Larta needs some wine in order to recover, with a hint of regret that he cannot get it now. But the girl whom she and Lart saved, holding the eggs, asked the man if he said about Juan, carefully holding out the much-needed natural food. The girl happened to have a small amount of food that was desperately needed for Lart's recovery and, as help, offers to take it, allowing her to take it. In surprise, the man stood up, thinking that the girl jumped into the fire for eggs, and in such a hungry time she shares food, which she would not do. Thinking that the instinct to protect others is an excellent quality, the man pats the girl on the head and thanks her for her help, saying how much she helped. Thinking that the child shared his only wealth by taking the Juan in his hand and placing his hand directly above the unconscious guy. With a sharp clench of his fist, Taser squeezes out of some of the food that there is some juice, since it will not work to force the guy to chew the food, a smart move on his part. Juice begins to roll down the teacher's hand, which drips onto the dry lips of the guy lying and resting, after such hard work in order to survive. After Huang fell on the guy's lips and poured into his mouth, he was immediately absorbed, and gave the lying person the strength to breathe calmly. Blood began to circulate. This is what Taser noticed, thinking that if he gave it a little every day, the gas would leave his body and then after a few days he would be able to leave. Dashka says that, finally, 3 days have passed. You can see how Taser's hand again lays his hand on the metal door, putting almost his last strength into it. By turning it with your hand, the damper opened, showing the morning light, opening the way out where, according to the idea, there should no longer be any poisonous gas. You can see how Lart finally came to his senses and, holding the girl in his arms, jumps through the crack of the open door, out while Taser is holding her. Of course, the teacher himself hurried after him, whom he managed to jump over better than last time, but Lart looked back to make sure. The sun was already setting outside, seeing off those who remained alive on this island with its last rays, while Lart was very glad that the gas had disappeared. Looking at the sun, Lart calmly and sadly says that now, on this big island, there are only 3 of them left, and there is no one else. But the girl who was rescued does not agree with the words of her older relative, nodding her head a little and as if she wants to show something. With misunderstanding, the men turned and looked at the girl, hoping to hear an explanation of what she exactly meant by her no. But she says that there are 5 of them, because it was not in vain that she jumped into the fire and saved these eggs, from which the same ones would later hatch. Walking up to the girl and sitting down on one knee in front of her, Lart, with a smile on his face, puts his hand on the eggs that the girl is holding and agrees with her. There are 5 of them. With maximum kindness and calmness in his voice, the tortured guy says that they need to go to the warehouse, because there will be a book there that will help hatch eggs. At first it seemed that the girl did not trust the guy, but now an unblemished smile with incredibly kind red eyes was visible on her face. It is already a deep and cloudy night outside, with the bright white huge moon reflecting the light of the star from its surface onto the planet, brightening the dark nights. You can see the girl lying on the bed with a burning candle, and eggs in the basket. She was pretty tired, so as soon as she ate, she immediately fell asleep. Lart stands on a certain ledge while the teacher approaches from behind, and asks him if the guy wanted to tell him something, since he called him at such an hour. Looking into the distance at the village that was left without its inhabitants, who committed atrocities against the nature faction for many years, the guy calls the name of the teacher. He addresses him with gratitude and kindness, which Taser notices by simply silently listening to what his student has to say in private. Bowing his head a little, Lart opens his soul to his teacher, saying that if you do not take into account the memory of Larchi, then these 11 days with the teacher were difficult. Remembering how he taught the girl the alphabet and reading, he thinks that for her they were just as difficult, especially at the age she is now. He also remembers how he showed her the food storage, where there was literally more than enough of it. Nothing would change, and what a shock this caused her. Turning to the teacher, he says that during all this time he spent too much of his energy on him and while he was teaching and taking care of him all the time. Even when he was unconscious, the guy felt like there was something wrong with the teacher's aura, and he believes that sacrificing power for him is simply unreasonable. Turning again from the teacher, he says that as the leader of the tribe of the gods, he will go alone, but it is not clear where exactly. For us this is not yet known. The teacher does not understand what the guy is talking about and he asks again what he is talking about, and his face is filled with shock and worry for his student. Filled with determination, Lart says that if it were not for the master, he would have died long ago, and without him he has no idea what to do, where to go, what he is striving for. However, Lart can no longer afford to make such sacrifices because of him, so if Taser disappears, then all hope is with him. He must take care of himself. The teacher agrees that his strength is almost zero, and he is alive only because he conserves energy, but it is also dangerous to confront Nathan alone. He also notices that 3 days ago everything disappeared under the Mugue rock, even the unfortunate fragments. The predators are so hungry that they ate them along with everything. After all, these are wild monsters guided only by instincts and they undoubtedly expose Lart's life to danger that he may not be able to cope with. And also, among all these dangerous monsters, there is an even more dangerous and ferocious one. This is the king of carnivores, which is more dangerous than every predator. Unlike ordinary ones, he is endowed with high intelligence and has unsurpassed telepathy. This creature poses a huge threat to Lart's life. However, in the guy's eyes, there is no hint of fear, uncertainty, or anything connected with these. Looking into the distance, he says that he does not know how to explain. But as soon as the guy left the bunker, he felt a strange feeling, or rather the conviction that everything he had in mind would work out. Confident in his words, he nods and, changing his face, becomes gloomy and with complete confidence, says that he can do this, he will win. Turning to Taser, he asks him if the teacher will allow him to do what he wants, while only self-confidence is visible on his face. The teacher looks at Lart and says his name, with emotion in his voice and distrust, because the enemy is really very serious and strong. This is dangerous. We are transported to a rock called Mugue, the same one from where everyone was thrown. It is stained with blood and destroyed from below and shrouded in dust in the air. With a quick movement, the camera moves away from the slope, showing its scale, as if heading to some other place from a huge rock. It takes us to a certain thicket of dried trees, not far from the ocean, washing waves straight onto the island from the horizon and an unknown distance. A certain coastal cave is visible, at the entrance of which skulls and bones are scattered, and the cave itself is located on a certain island called Broiler. It's as if something is shooting into the head of that same super predator Nathan. He noticed something or someone, and now he will take action. Sitting on a hill in front of many predators, he says something in an unknown language to all those who are in the cave, and everyone listens to him. In an already known language, it speaks intermittently that the airflow has changed, and also talks about meat, opening a smile from ear to ear, as well as from the eyes. Opening his huge mouth and eyes, he says that he feels a faint smell of food, which disappears, for large hands with sharp blades on them are visible. Placing all 4 of his arms at his sides, he emits a loud roar that shakes the walls and the predators immediately begin to move in obedience to him. Having started to move, the crowd of predators listens to their leader, who only talks about food, and thereby forces everyone to move as quickly as possible. The full moon suggests that on this day a ritual was supposed to be held, but thanks to Lart's actions, it will no longer exist, which means predators without food. You can see the face of a monster screaming about bringing him more food. His skin is red like meat, huge sharp teeth and eyes, and a terrifying appearance. The next day, Taser and Lart silently watches the girl in the distance again scratches the rock in the village with her claws. She sits on her bandaged legs, and with both hands scratches the rock in front of which she sits, thus seeming to relax and occupy her hands. The Taser, looking at the picture of a little girl simply scratching a rock, understands that due to stress, she is obsessed with repetitive actions. After all, this poor thing has been forced to work since childhood, and it seems she doesn't feel safe. Not everyone gets to experience this. Raising his head up and looking at the sun setting behind the horizon, Taser asks Lart if he is ready to go into battle one-on-one with Nathan. After remaining silent for some time and as if pondering many thoughts, he confidently answers that yes, he is ready to go into battle alone. And since Lart is ready, the teacher suggests taking a walk along the cliff, because he has something to tell the guy before he goes into battle. The teacher tells him that even though predators and ferocious monsters eat everything in their prey, leaving nothing but bones, they do not touch the heart. In turn, they present this heart to apex predators, who for some reason are simply obsessed with eating these particular human organs. It is during the full moon that Nathan becomes more sensitive to external influences, and therefore, if he does not have any food to absorb, the identity of the victim becomes completely unimportant for him, be it a predator or a representative of another of the numerous, various existing factions. He will absolutely not care about all those facts, or the origin of his victim, because the feeling of hunger and the instinct to fill the void will take over. He will choose anyone and kill him in the most brutal manner possible, tearing off his head, tearing out his heart and devouring it, leaving the corpse to rot somewhere in a cave. And he only needs the whole bunch of other predators to ensure the protection of his much-loved and important person from various types of dangers. And when the full moon comes, higher carnivores go in search of food, and precisely for this reason, they have no choice but to leave the shelter. And the presence of this fact and opportunity creates a gap in such a powerful defense, and thus Taser gives a hint to Lart to use it. And when all the predators leave, the guy will easily be able to penetrate the lair of such protected and seemingly dangerous monsters with impunity. Taser tells the guy that here they are at the cliff, while on the cliff there is a strange-looking cart with a lot of strange-looking material, which he notices. A little confused and not understanding that he was in this very cart, the guy asked the teacher what he was thinking about in it. With a calm voice, he says that he transferred everything that was in the bunker here. By everything he means all the bodies of burned alive, charred carnivores. Having pulled himself together, Lart does not lose his confidence in the success of this venture and his victory. He says that everything that was said by the teacher will be fulfilled. Approaching the very edge of the cliff, the guy stands and looks down from a high slope, from which he had already fallen down once, just like all his relatives. Turning to Taser, he calls him master and turns to him, wanting to say something, finally, before setting off on the path to the cave. Turning to him, the guy thanks his teacher for believing in his success and giving the go-ahead. He is very grateful and happy about this. Taser silently nodded, making it clear that he was saying goodbye in this way. It was time to leave. They believed in Lart's success and they believed in him and were waiting here with victory. Lart gradually began to descend with the help of the catching aura, forming under his feet the same steps of an invisible staircase, made of a bright pink aura. And from this moment on, Taser can reduce energy consumption to a minimum, causing it to instantly dim, like a table lamp. He remembers that it is necessary to complete all of Vine's orders and get to the central continent, but time on each island is limited. Therefore, Taser understands the importance of this guy's mission, and how dangerous it is and how capable it is of killing him depends on Lart's luck or failure. They would play a decisive role in further events, while Lart went further and further towards the dangerous and ominous lair of monsters, straight towards the sunset. After some time, Lart talks to himself about how much he has to go through, and he also understands that he has been walking for a long time. Understanding how huge his home island is, but not knowing about it, just because he was constantly on top of a cliff, makes the guy embarrassed. But from such thoughts, the guy is distracted by the smell of rot, which he smelled with his sensitive nose and looked towards this unpleasant and fetid smell. Standing in a lifeless thicket full of dry trees, Lart realizes that he is in place, and the desired cave is in front of him, and day gives way to night, ending with sunset. Starting to think about the fact that if you go into a cave of predators, they will instantly smell a stranger and attack him like mad dogs, so this is definitely not an option. However, the guy heard that they can smell on the plain up to 10 meters, but at high altitudes the monsters are more vulnerable, so this will help. Looking up, the guy understands that he needs to walk through the air as high as possible, so as not to be noticed, and successfully wait out the departure of all the monsters. As Lart begins his ascent into the air above the cave, he thinks about when all the predators head towards Mount Muguay, the cave will be completely empty, which will be a chance. And then, when exactly this chance comes, he can do whatever he wants in that cave, and with the understanding of this, he rises into the air as high as possible. Having risen as high as possible, Lart is confident that he will succeed, and even though the battle will not be easy, he will emerge victorious and return to his teacher. A few hours later, a huge full moon can be seen rising into the sky and shining in all its glory, illuminating the dark night sky and land, with Taser standing. The man noticed that the moon would rise completely very soon, looking at it into the night sky from a high cliff, Mount Mugue, with a deplorable history. Taking one corpse from a huge cart from numerous burnt predators by the scruff of the neck, like the processed garbage that they in fact are. He dragged it to the edge of the cliff and thought about what an excellent bait they would be for the numerous, hungry creatures that would come here. The man throws one of the corpses down, causing him to crumble a little, because he was burned, but it still won't hurt, at least here they will be useful. The situation with the corpse of one of the carnivores falling straight into the gorge was reminiscent of how the same carnivores threw poor children off the same cliff. The carcass slammed loudly on the stones, breaking the scorched bones. Well, it's okay, it will heal before the wedding, although not for sure, maybe it also works on corpses. Lart can be seen standing high in the sky, as if under the moon itself, waiting for the chance to enter the cave and finally end all this horror. He remembers how the teacher, back in the evening, told him that he would throw all the remnants of carnivores down the cliff at midnight. Taser says that then all the predators will leave the cave to find food for the super predator Nathan, who has gone mad with hunger, so as not to be eaten. And it is then that Lart will be able to fight one-on-one with Nathan, and will come out of this life and death battle as a winner, and will return back. Standing at a great height, the guy sees a cave, waves of salt water washing up on the shores of the island, and just waits for the creatures to start crawling out of their hole. Standing and looking down with eyes glowing with anticipation, the only thing he can do now is stand and wait, which is what he actually does. Finally, there is a loud noise coming straight from the cave of many hungry creatures below, which Lart himself notices, causing him to tremble. It can be seen how a huge number of large white monsters with many eyes begin to pour out of the cave in order to search for food for the chapter. A large army heads out of the cave, one after another, moving further and further away from the shelter, giving the opportunity for Lart. And noticing them, the guy thought that, as the teacher said, as soon as the full moon rose, the monsters immediately began to crawl out of the cave like ants. The stomping of many huge paws has stopped and the last predator has disappeared from sight, and finally Lart has the opportunity to go down into the cave itself and fight. The guy thought about this, starting his descent down. He says to himself that he must go down to the ground and enter the cave, but he seems to sigh. Descending to the ground along the steps from its bright pink aura, more similar to fire or small explosions like confetti, it's hard to describe. Having descended to the same place where he stood and looked at the sun setting over the horizon, when at night this place looks more ominous and scary. Walking through the dead thickets, the guy notices that as he approaches, the smell of rot intensifies and intensifies, beginning to assault his nose with a disgusting stench. Having walked further, he stood on a certain stone ledge, from which there was a view of the cave itself, from which numerous predatory creatures had previously emerged. Lart's gaze was attracted by this cave, and he did not take his eyes off it, but only watched, staring at this natural formation, going deep underground. Entering an ominous cave gave one a strange sensation. An ordinary cave at first glance literally glowed with a disgusting aura. This is what the guy notices, thinking that the ominous aura reigning around easily penetrates to the very bones, making him feel discomfort. Suddenly the guy's gaze is attracted by something that scares him and makes him indignant and shocked by what he sees. Something lies on the side of him. He noticed that at the entrance to the cave, gnawed bones of various types of animals, and not only animals, but also people, were carelessly scattered everywhere. All the guy's confidence disappears as he approaches the cave in which Nathan is hiding, and he thinks that his heart is about to break into pieces. But he tries to pull himself together despite such strong tension and goes forward thinking that everything will work out for him and tries not to lose hope. Entering further and further into the darkness enveloping him completely from head to toe, he thinks that he should face this. But there is always one. But as soon as the guy went deep into the cave itself, seeing how his opponent was sitting, he froze in place and could not move from horror. Drops of sweat began to run down the face of the guy who had recently been so confident in his abilities, and his face itself tensed with fear of what he was seeing. He understands that this determination came to him only for a moment, before he sits directly opposite and already turns to the guy. Noticing him, his heart froze from real horror, and his body began to shake, unable to do anything, simply leaving him standing rooted to the spot in one place. Remembering all the battles before, he felt one thing: it was just a pure manifestation of anger, and this helped him to remain often so combat ready. Before this, his mind was cold as ice and helped him cope in battles, but now for the first time he experienced real animal fear of the enemy. A creature unlike anything he had ever seen turned to him, and with all its appearance it showed its danger. This feeling cannot be confused with anything, never. Before the guy's gaze was the predator Nathan himself, who was the leader of everyone on this island, and they noticed him and were ready for battle while the guy was opposite. Full of eyes, the terrible creature says, "How could evolution come to this?" clearly mocking Lart and his body structure, exalting himself. Looking at the enemy with constricted pupils and swallowing his tongue, he, bleeding sweat, cannot utter a word, but only stands frozen from animal fear. The guy remembers the words of his mentor about this predator, how he is endowed with high intelligence and poses a huge threat to his life. He tries to pull himself together, his eyes are still filled with rhinestones, but he tries to calm down while he has time for this and give him a fight. But without even having time to think out his thought to the end, the enormous monster swings one of its arms with blades at extremely high speed. But the guy manages to sit down and save himself from the fate of Satoru Gojo, and be sawed in half and lose his battle so quickly. But due to the guy's lack of composure, the reason for which is fear, a large cut runs across his forehead, indicating that Nathan still hit him with his huge blade. The monster speaks questioningly about the threat, and looks at the guy standing in front of him, who dodged his blow, but without thinking at all. A deafening roar of a monster can be heard throughout the cave, which clearly does not like the guest who came to him today on the full moon, when he was hungry. Because of such a loud roar, the guy's heart sank to his feet and he began to feel fear only more than a week earlier, and still could not do anything. Showing superiority, the monster says in his disgusting voice that today is the day he has been waiting for, the day of offering. And on this day, Nathan will finally be able to eat deliciously, satisfying his remarkable appetite, looking with his double eyes at the guy rooted to the spot in fear. Taking the man's skull with his huge and enormous fingers, the monster sighs, saying how hard it was for him to deal with the poor unfortunate man. Without a young and fresh heart, he brought the skull to his disfigured face and began to gradually squeeze it, which made the monster begin to shake in his fingers. With ease, the monster breaks the skull with 2 fingers, saying how pleased he is that he can finally fill his stomach, turning his gaze to the guy. But the guy thinks about the monster's words about a fresh young heart, standing in a stupor in thoughts and a complete lack of understanding of what is happening. His face became covered with even more sweat from shock and from his own thoughts and understanding of what was happening to him at this moment in time. Looking around, not paying attention to the monster standing on a hill, he does not believe that all these bones he sees around him. Every full moon a sacrifice was brought here, and as we remember, every full moon the sacrifice was a child of his faction from the carnivorous tribe. From this fact, which for some reason was forgotten in the head of the main character, his blood boils with rage, his teeth close and he is covered in a pink aura. Seething with rage for all those who were eaten here, including his brother, he says that he doesn't care if it's Nathan or anyone else, but realizing that it's time for him to change fear to anger, standing in front of the monster completely covered with a strong aura, says that it's time for them to start from there. The trembling in Lart's body passed as quickly as it had appeared, and he shouted out to the monster that it did not deserve its life, extending his hand covered in aura. The taser stands on the cliff, watching as a huge aura of monsters heads towards the slope, like a herd of horses on a field of grass. Having arrived at the place, they began to eat everything they could get their hands on and turn the color of their white fur red because of the blood on their teeth. Opening their huge mouths with huge teeth that looked more like spikes, completely stained with the blood of the corpses they had just eaten, they began to growl. Having grabbed the heart in their huge paws very carefully, they ate everything they saw and smelled, but they did not dare touch this organ and carefully took it away. Many predators, having feasted on the corpses, taking their hearts, immediately began to leave in order to bring food to their hungry leader. The tasers saw that they absorbed everything they could, but left their hearts, and in turn, instinct forces them to return to the cave and make offerings. All the predators turned away from the slope, leaving behind huge pools of blood, and began to return to the shelter and make offerings to the head. Holding one of the corpses of burnt carnivores by the scruff of the neck, he looks at the departing predators and thinks that this internal attitude plays into their hands. Because with the help of such an installation, they manage to avoid the punishment of Nathan, maddened by hunger, saving their own and others' lives from the tribe. Thinking about this, Taser hurries to throw down from the cliff another body of a cracker who used to be a representative of the carnivorous faction living in the village. Falling with a slap onto the stones stained with blood from the feast of departing monsters, he forced the same monsters to look in the same direction where the sound was. The not very smart predators stood for a short time and quietly growled, since their installation told them to go to the shelter, and then the food fell, what to do? But without hesitation, always insatiable and not so smart, the whole group pounces on the lying corpse with hearts in all hands, succumbing to hunger. Without waiting even a second, they began to eat the corpse given to them, while Taser looked at all this, who would do this more than once in order to detain them here. Standing and looking at all that bloody mess with hungry creatures eating everything they could fit into their mouths and resembling organic matter. He thinks about the fact that he still needs to throw the bait and thus keep all these creatures at the bottom of the cliff, not allowing them to get even 10 meters closer to Larta. Allowing the guy to fully concentrate on the battle with the most important and dangerous monster, which is currently ready to attack while sitting on a hill. Lart stands in front of him with a completely calm look and an aura concentrated on his right hand that makes his hand literally burn. We see this scene again, where Lart's burning hand glows with his aura, and he tells the monster that he needs to start with what? Seething with rage and clenching his hand, tearing it apart from the flow of aura in it, he shouts to Nathan that he is just a mistake of nature that should not exist. His gaze became empty and filled with rage from the fact that this creature was constantly eating his relatives, including his beloved brother. He needed to warm up. A terrible-looking monster looks at the guy with its disgustingly huge eyes and a skinless muzzle, showing huge teeth. Sitting on his blood-red legs, which were similar to the legs of a very muscular dinosaur without skin, he strains them to move. With its strong jerk, the monster disappears from the place where it was sitting, leaving behind cut stones from the claws on its disgusting paws. Literally in an instant, the huge monster found itself in a different place, and was already swinging its huge paws with blades to strike the guy. Lart was not very prepared for such an attack, because at such a huge speed, a hefty and ugly carcass ended up above his head. Nathan makes 2 cutting blows, which only hit the hair of the guy who dodged to the side from such a strong attack that would cut him. Seeing how such a quick and sudden attack was dodged, the monster did not slow down and swung with another pair of hands. A blow passes towards the guy, but does not hit, because he succeeded in jumping up, thereby parrying the enemy's attack. With his strong blows, he would have cut the guy with ease, but he only hit the rock that was behind the one he was aiming at. Landing on the ceiling, Lart prepares to attack while the monster looks at him from below with his head up after a quick blow. Standing and looking up next to the damage to the inner wall of the cave, Lareth makes a sharp lunge and also disappears from sight for a matter of moments. The guy appears behind Nathan, in the air, and he accumulates aura in both hands, preparing to stab the huge monster in the back. Clenching his fist, a huge amount of pink aura, like sakura petals, begins to be released from it, which he wanted to strike. From his hand clenched into a fist, something began to appear in the form of a laser, which was somewhat similar to the one he used when he pulled the lever in the bunker. Having shouted that the monster should receive it, he directed 2 laser whips from 2 hands at him, which were larger than the guy himself and were aimed at the monster. But Nathan was not going to stand and watch as a strong attack approached him and pulled out blades from his hands that began to glow. With these shining blades, he deals a crossblow to Lart's attack, which in turn dissipates and fails to reach its target. From such an attack, Lart was not a little surprised, and his face tensed from the fact that the enemy turned out to be stronger than expected and dispelled the attack aimed at him. Being in a bad position in the air, where it is impossible to make any maneuver, Lart simply falls with his arms crossed until the enemy loses time. Nathan delivers a crushing blow to the body of the guy who could easily flatten an unprepared person as if with a press. From such a blow, Lart flew straight into the stone wall, bleeding from his head from such strong loads and the forces of the monster's blow itself. The guy spins into the wall, breaking several layers of stones on it with his vertebrae, as he was thrown back by the monster's hand. Because of the force, he was slammed so that he got stuck a little and coughed up blood, making it clear that his organs were already affected by this blow. Lart looks at his opponent in front of him while remaining in the wall, thinking about a certain conservation of energy, which in turn was violated. Jumping straight onto the flying Lart, the monster extended his hand forward, intending to use his sharp claws on it to cut him like a vegetable into a salad. A blow occurs that hits the young man, causing his blood to gushing from the wound that Nathan inflicted, and he himself is thrown to the side. The monster stands in front of the guy in a victorious pose, showing his superiority over him and already confident that he emerged victorious in this battle. While at the same time Lart lies in his blood and shakes from trying to get to his feet and continue the battle, because if not, he may die. Something like spittle flies out of the monster's mouth, but its saliva has a strange color, and it also literally smokes and flies at great speed. Having time to react, the guy leans to the side, letting the spit fly past, but his cheek is still slightly grazed due to the speed. The bloodied Lart felt that the energy was disappearing, and besides, his saliva burned his face, which means it is poisonous and very dangerous. Reveling in his victory, the monster tells the guy that his face shows that he has finally begun to understand the reality of what is happening to him. Finding himself in such a difficult situation, Lart realizes that he doesn't have much time, and he needs to do something, and now it's dangerous, he needs to think. And realizing that he has no choice but to move as quickly as possible to make it difficult for Nathan to attack, he does so. Blow after blow, Lart blocks and parries, moving at the maximum speed possible for him, in all the time of his training in life. Trying to save his life and emerge victorious, he is repeatedly wounded and hit, but he does not give up and continues. Telling himself that if he concentrates, everything will work out, every mistake is now equal to death, but still, he decides to risk everything. Nathan makes many slashing and slashing attacks that literally filled the entire space of the cave in which his battle with Lart takes place. In turn, Lart, risking his life, tries to dodge all attacks at maximum speed and get close to the enemy. We are told that the creature in front of Nathan is small and insignificant, like a worthless ant that is a snack for the predator before a full dinner. But still, this worthless ant manages to quickly dodge all of his attacks and dares to act against the monster's intentions. Then Nathan, who is the highest of the predators, begins to worry seriously about his own safety and security. Raising his hands in rage, he growls loudly, causing the walls to shake. He calls Lart an insignificant creature. Apparently the predator is seriously angry. Lart, this second, as his opponent is indignant, raising his hands up and not attacking, he uses this to finally rest calmly. Standing on one knee and trying to breathe enough before continuing, allowing his strength to recover at least a little after many attacks. The guy remembers the day when Taser showed the guy warming for the first time, which lit a spark in him and gave him hope to learn. And when he passed his foot along the ground, causing it to turn into lava, it was imprinted in the guy's mind for a long time like a photograph. Lart, dripping with sweat, rejoices in the fact that because of his actions, Nathan became nervous, and this situation and the restlessness of the enemy can only benefit him. He tells himself that all the events that have happened to him over the past 11 days spent with his mother, Taser, on that island. One after another, all the new movements that he learned, fighting techniques, tactics and techniques, all the moments of his training flash through his head. And he will do everything in his power, transferring the aura to his legs, from which they begin to burn with a pink flame, preparing for a truly fast jerk. Indeed, during the battle with Nathan, Lart's aggression was supported by his strength, which was given to him by Juan's berries. The guy uses warming. And all that rage that had been accumulating in the young man for many years of his life could no longer be held. He quickly lunges and jumps upward in front of the enemy. Covered in an aura, he lets out a scream from his lungs and, straining his whole body, understands that he needs to do exactly what he has in mind now, and flies towards the wall. Landing on the wall, he abruptly pushes off with one foot and causes his leg to glow with the flames of his rage and a strong aura. Being at the peak of his capabilities, Lard is completely tense and ready to do what he was thinking about. The moment is won, the rage is at maximum, as is the reaction. A leg with sharp claws, being in the air and swinging to strike, glows with an aura like the sun, showing the seriousness of this attack. Having screamed with all the air that was in his lungs and heading towards his enemy in the person of the supreme predator Nathan, he shouts to him what he gets. Swinging over his head, he spins like a fiery wheel, striking the air and scattering pieces of the aura, calling the enemy a vile animal. Many eyes noticed the blow that was approaching Nathan, but due to the fact that the blow was aimed at hitting the area, it was problematic to escape. Many needles from the aura fell on the monster in a thick and strong hail, covering it as if with a cloud of sharp arrows from thousands of cavalry. Many sharp needles created from the guy's aura stuck into the creature's flesh and left a very unpleasant, burning pain and numerous wounds. The wounded predator, left without two eyes on one side, shouted at the guy to stop it, making it clear how afraid he was of this guy. The gasping guy, who had already landed and even rested a little, was just trying to catch his breath after such a strong attack and waste of aura. But even though he is so tired, he understands that in this situation the main thing is not to stop the pace and hit again and again. Forcing himself to move faster, he got up from his knee and began to run towards the wounded enemy, who was huddled in a corner in pain. But the eye on the predator's chest noticed the approach of his enemy and turned to him, which means that Nathan saw the guy. Sharply grabbing him on the torso, Nathan lifts his opponent off the ground. Even though he has many holes and wounds, he still has the strength to fight. Holding in his hand the one who caused such great damage to His Majesty, he stood up and with great force sent the guy in his hand into the nearest wall. Nathan nailed Lark to the wall like an annoying mosquito that flew under his ear all evening, buzzed, and eventually began to bite. After which he repeated the same thing, nailing Lark to the floor with incredible force, right on his face, causing the stones under him to burst at the seams. With a broken and bloody face, the guy has no choice but to cough from all the pain he is experiencing and spit out all the blood in his mouth. With shaking hands and shaking all over, Nathan holds the guy with 4 hands and says that now he understands everything, because he tried to remove all the predators further. To take advantage of the lack of any protection and attack the last one remaining in the lair, Nathan, who was waiting for offerings from those who had left. But now, the monster laughs and mocks the guy, because he tried so hard, but nothing worked out. Apparently this is fate, and so she decided. And Nathan also says that there is no one who could go against her and the laws of the universe, while he presses the guy harder and harder into the floor. Raising his head up, the monster tells the guy who is trying to do something to feel how helpless he is, to accept and realize his unenviable fate. And he lets out a loud cry that the guy would simply disappear. Wounded and unable to finish off the enemy, he calls for help. Many predators located under Mount Mugue rejoice at the feast and eat all the bait thrown down by Taser, and are in no hurry to go to shelter. However, everyone is instantly distracted from their studies as soon as, with the help of telepathy, they hear the words of their head about disappearing and raise their heads. They hear an order from the top predator himself, Nathan, who used telepathy as soon as he learned Lark's tactics to defeat him. Taser, standing on the top of the cliff, noticed that all the monsters at once stopped eating the carrion that he threw to them, which was not typical for them. With loud screams and growls, they all rushed away from the cliff towards their shelter where Nathan and Lard were now fighting. The monster called for help. The Taser understood that Nathan called everyone to return to the cave. The worst outcome for Lard, who was in it. Shock and worry were visible in his eyes. Having prepared for the jump, he thinks that he needs to follow them. The guy will need his help in this matter. He concentrates electricity. But his gaze and movements instantly freeze, because he remembered Lard's words when he set off on his way to the cave, and how he addressed him. Lard asked the master not to follow him under any circumstances, and if he disobeyed, the whole plan would go awry. Remembering his student's request that he not walk, shaking from tension and anxiety, Taser simply stood up and began to wait. Gritting his teeth, Taser began to think that if he disobeys, then Venus' orders will not be carried out, and he needs to trust Larta. He will cope. A crowd of predators, brutalized with rage, headed straight towards the monster and the young man fighting in the cave, on the orders of Nathan himself. Before their eyes, all those predators see only the face of their leader, calling everyone to immediately return back to the shelter, no matter what. His red eyes do not see and do not know the word no, because everything is not over yet and he will be able to get out of the predator's grip and finish everything. All these actions that he did forced Nathan to call back all those who went to look for food far from here. Nathan himself, the highest of the predators, was numerously wounded, so much so that the only thing he can do now is call for help and so on. Hold with your own hands the one who inflicted these wounds on him, not allowing him to move and deliver the final blow and ending it all once and for all. In a state of full energy saving, Taser simply stands and waits for Lark to return victorious while he remembers about the words of his student that without him he was a non-entity and a helpless creature who knew nothing of this big world. Lart has long had a single dream, an old one, the only one, and therefore the most desirable one that he can imagine and strive for. He talks about how his brother Lurch died because of these predator creatures and that is why he wants to avenge him. This is his real duty. And he is very worried about Taser's current state, because he is too worried about the guy's safety, which is why he simply has to invest all the strength he has in him to destroy at the root everything that is bad on Garth, and so that he can finally take revenge for all his pain. Taser said that everything written in the prophecy is true, but he wants to challenge fate and see how predetermined it is. Standing on a cliff in the bright night, while Lart fights to the death at the request not to help him, Taser thinks about what Lart simply humbly accepted. He accepted and humbly endures the harsh reality that awaits him in the near future, and the only thing he can do at the moment. So, plan to enter the halls of the ominous hideout of monsters and kill your opponent Nathan, before the other creatures return to the cave. After all, ordinary predators are connected to their leader by a common mind, and without him they simply cannot move, they are so helpless in reality. But, unfortunately, despite Lart's strength and what he has learned, this is only given one attempt, and there may not be a repeat. For now, the Taser will still last in energy-saving mode, but soon it will be necessary to go to another continent to recharge. And at the moment, while the teacher's strength has almost completely dried up, the fate of the whole world is in the hands of Lart alone, fighting in the cave. Shaking from his wounds, Nathan pressed his whole body onto the guy and holds him with his hands, because he understands that he will no longer be able to fight back his opponent. A huge and dangerous monster is shaking with fear and waiting for help, as if a little boy is waiting for his older brother to help. Lying under the huge carcass of the monster, and almost losing consciousness, he realizes that he cannot move because of the weight of the one who is sitting on him. And so, the huge claws on Nathan's hands dig deeply into the guy's skin, already causing severe discomfort, making it difficult to get out. The guy describes the feeling of having a monster sitting on him, as if his body was being crushed by a huge chiseled stone. Lart feels helpless. But after he almost gave up and accepted the fate of being crushed, he comes to his senses when he notices something from behind. The right leg, he can move it since the monster's huge hands hold the whole body and cannot reach it. This is the hope of salvation for Lart. Having tensed, the guy decides that after all, this is a chance for salvation, as well as victory, so he wants to try to do something immediately. He feels a surge of strength as his leg releases a trail of fiery aura, albeit rather weak, but it's better than nothing, which means there are chances. Concentrating all his attention on the leg and the aura that comes out of it, Lart tries to strengthen it in order to strike and free himself from the one who has settled on him. Straining in an attempt to strengthen and stabilize the energy coming out of his right leg, which can move, and in the end he succeeds. The fire rekindled in the eyes of the immobilized guy, who looked at his opponent with anger and contempt, activating the catch ability. The energy coming out of the guy's leg flared up like a forest thorn under Nathan's feet, making it clear that the strength was enough to cause injury. Releasing his last strength, a heartbreaking cry emerges from the guy's lungs, in which all the guy's confidence and hope for victory and revenge is visible. The monster, who doesn't understand what's happening, looks at the screaming guy and thinks about what's happening, because he's pinned him down and won't let him move. But while the predator sitting still did not understand what was happening to the one he was holding, behind his back all that energy was rapidly rising. With a sharp lift of his leg, the guy hits his opponent with all his accumulated energy like a huge whip, throwing him forward with terrible force. The blow hit the unsuspecting predator straight in the back, who had already accepted the fact that he had won and did not even have time to understand what had happened. Rising to his feet after the capture, Lart does not believe what he has achieved, but he has little strength, and he himself is seriously wounded, but he cannot hesitate. With a sharp jerk, the guy jumps to the side next to the wall, as if he had no wounds, but had more than enough strength. After the jerk, the guy lands on the wall and, holding onto it, looks down to check what's wrong with his opponent and how much time he has. While trembling from all the wounds that the beast received, he lay on the floor and tried to recover from an unexpected strong blow to his back. Lart, motivating himself to move and continue the battle, says that there is very little left and he will emerge victorious from this battle. But at that moment, while the guy covered himself with an aura, his opponent had already come to his senses a little and turned his head in his direction, looking with huge eyes. Completely shining from the huge amount of aura emanating from the guy's hands, he flew straight at his opponent, jumping off the wall. Just like the first attack, Lart flew at Nathan with fiery whips made of his energy while his opponent stood and looked up in preparation. But the monster was not going to stand and count crows. He suddenly jumps up to the young man and strikes him in the face with his knee, causing the energy in his hands to dissipate. Lart had never expected such an attack from a weakened monster, and from the blow he almost lost consciousness and began coughing, unsuccessfully trying to breathe. And at the same moment, even though Nathan's face did not have lips or any features to show emotions, it was clear that he continued to mock. Landing at one moment on the stone floor of the cave, but in different ways, the young man was on his back after the blow, while Nathan was on his paws and seemed to be grinning. The monster speaks and gives credit to the enemy. He did not expect the attack, but despite this, he says that they will finish there, because the order to the predators has already been given. Reveling in the thought that he has won, the predator says that when all his subjects come to his call, Lart will no longer be able to cope with them and will die. But wiping off the blood from the monster's blows, the guy, mockingly, asks that in this way he acknowledges the fact that he cannot cope with him alone. And despite the wounds, he also adds that he was really afraid of such a worthless monster, and calls Nathan and all his subjects unnecessary trash. These words obviously greatly hurt the honor and pride of such a reasonable monster, but his entire fearful and vile nature does not allow him to make another choice. While the monster stood and was furious at the words of his opponent, the young man stood up, even if he was shaking from weakness and fatigue, but he did not give up. However, it was not he who was shaking, but his entire surroundings, the walls, floor, ceiling, and he notices this, thinking about why everything around him shook. But the monster says that all his predators are already very close, and rejoicing at his salvation, he says that if the guy is so brave, let him tell them the same words as he said to him. But the monster was sure that with these words he would completely kill all the regret of the battle from the guy and did not expect that he would jump on him covered with an aura. Fearing for his life and safety, the monster begins to shout to his opponent to stop doing senseless things. And after these words, with the last of his strength he begins to shower his opponent with a hail of cutting blows, but Lart doesn't care and he goes straight ahead. Taking some of the blows that hit him, he realizes that he has absolutely no time, so he must hurry and not be afraid of blows and attacks. The guy tells himself to concentrate, because he is obliged to do everything in his power for the sake of his older brother who died at the hands of this monster. Having made many quick jerks filled with energy, Lart, with wild eyes, raises his hand with a flaming aura, intending to strike. Clenching his fist, causing the already huge amount of aura to flare up even stronger in his hand, he understands that he still has no way back. Giving up will not work. Lart delivers a crushing blow followed by a pink trail, creating something like a crescent moon and hitting the target straight. However, what he saw turned out to be false. His opponent managed to make a dash and was literally behind him while finishing the attack. But even in such a situation, the young man did not lose hope and told himself to only move forward and not give up, because he could cope, and noticed the enemy. Nathan strikes with both hands at once and misses, since Lart managed to arch his back and dodge the attacks, and the hands flew from above. Having landed, the evasion field, without wasting any time, immediately jumps in the other direction so as not to get hit and deliver its attack. But the moment the guy jumped away, the realization came to him that Nathan, just like him, was trying to avoid all attacks aimed at him. Two cutting blows rush past the guy who jumped back with incredible force, and he realizes that close combat is useless, as he had not realized before. Dodging countless attacks, the guy decides that at this point in the battle, even though it is very dangerous, he needs to keep an eye on it. Remembering that unexpected kick attack for himself and his opponent, in the back of Nathan sitting on him, he understands one important detail for him. It seems that even though he has a lot of eyes, there is a blind spot, and this is his back, which means that he needs to grab him by the neck and hit him as hard as he can. Having come up with a plan of action for victory, referring to past mistakes, the guy decides to concentrate all his energy on his fingertips. Jumping onto the wall once again, the guy understands that for him, this is the last chance, so he is more serious than ever. A double blow from Nathan's huge blades flies past, hitting only the place where the guy was sitting until he made a dash and flew under the enemy's hands. Only Nathan, who finishes the blow, does not understand what his opponent is up to, and cannot keep track of how quickly he moved. Having made a dash and dodged the enemy's blow, the guy lands on the floor and makes another dash towards the standing monster. But he is not going to just stand there and delivers another blow, but hits the floor, destroying him while Lart again parries the monster's attack. Having run around the monster, the guy jumps at enormous speeds onto the ceiling, and from it, in turn, onto the enemy who has just turned around. I realized that the young man was not there. Where he turned, the monster raised his head up, not fully understanding what the guy himself was doing. But he realized this too late, because by that moment, Lart was already above the neck and spread his arms in order to make a chokehold. Landing exactly on the enemy's back, the guy takes the monster's neck in a lock, taking advantage of the enemy's lack of understanding of what is happening. Holding his neck and concentrating his aura on his fingertips, Lart delivers a critical hit as planned, causing the monster to scream in pain. Landing blow after blow, Lart's rage rises and becomes stronger, along with all the aura that enveloped his hand, while Nathan simply screams. You can see how all the summoned predators rush straight into the shelter, trying to place their entire numerical army inside and help the leader of the pack. Nathan does not give up and tries to strike the guy who grabbed his neck with his feet and throw him off it in order to survive and wait for help. But the only thing that bothers Lart is that he needs to concentrate all his remaining aura and deliver the decisive blow. Many maddened predators who have just arrived jump into the cave and head deeper and finally help their summoner. Receiving enormous damage, Lart continues to sit on his neck and accumulate all the remaining energy in order to deliver a critical and final blow to end the battle. A loud stomp is heard from many huge paws that are approaching at unimaginable speed to the place of battle between Lart and the leader Nathan. Covered with abrasions, blood, dirt, and various wounds, the guy does not give up and makes his hand shine brighter and brighter, telling himself that he can. The light from his hand is so bright that it is like the scorching sun, and his aura changed color from bright pink to an equally bright blood red. Many hands of predators reach out to the intruder of their shelter, who sits literally astride their head, deciding to strike the decisive blow in the battle. The guy's entire hand was completely covered with an aura, painted red, and veins appeared on it, and he again tells himself that he only has one chance. Realizing that all the energy has already been collected in his hand, and the enemies are getting closer, Lart is finally going to strike and says to himself that Nathan will disappear. The incredible blow leaves behind a clear tail of Lart's bright and thick energy, after a sharp, chopping movement of his hand, as if with an axe. Like a guillotine falling on the neck of a suicide bomber, so here on the neck of the head of the predators, the guy makes a slashing blow with his aura similar to a huge knife blade. In an instant, all the predators galloping towards Lart stood in place and began to shake, and their eye sockets became completely black like pitch. Immediately the monsters around fell dead, literally crumbling into dust, because without their leader they are helpless and incapable of combat. Sitting on the defeated enemy in the person of the terrible monster Nathan, the guy with a huge number of wounds is trying to clear his throat and breathe calmly. All the predators that had recently fallen in full began to crumble like a burnt page of a book, which in itself is useless and not valuable. Looking into the distance towards the exit from the cave, Lart sees many fallen dead and crumbling creatures that wanted to kill and tear him apart. A smile is visible on the young man's face, because he managed and finally received a well-deserved, albeit not complete, rest, and a teacher and a girl are waiting for him in the village. The ocean surf drives waves of salt water from the shores of that very ominous cave, which now, finally, no one will occupy. The footage zooms in again on Mount Mugue, which is shrouded in fog as daylight slowly but surely dawns outside, revealing a view of the island's vast wilderness. On the cliff stands Taser, who is in his energy-saving mode and is quietly waiting for his student, whom he trusted and relied on. While in his mode, his face is darkened like a dim light bulb, and the teacher simply stands and waits for Lart to return victorious. The sun begins to rise from the horizon, dispersing the darkness and illuminating the entire area with light, as if showing that the dark days have passed and now everything is fine. Walking instead with the rising sun, from the fog you can see the silhouette of a guy walking with something in his hands, who survived in Mark's change, just like the sun. Noticing the approach of a certain silhouette on the horizon, Taser drew attention to it and began to wait for it to come closer and understand who it was. High horns, hairstyle, and the whole silhouette are noticeable. Lart finally returns home alive, but unfortunately not so straight and whole, but most importantly alive. Realizing that this is none other than his student, Taser quickly changes his face and clearly begins to closely watch the guy from the mountain, examining him. Lart, breathing heavily, covered in blood and wearing torn clothes, holds in his left hand what appears to be the head of his defeated opponent, as a sign of his victory. Fully realizing that this was his student after all, Taser jumped in and loudly shouted the guy's name and did not notice the head in his hands, the head of Nathan himself. Starting to descend from the cliff, with joy in his thoughts, the man thought that his student had managed it and was proud of him, and glad that he was alive. Exhausted from a difficult battle, bloodied and literally suffocating, the guy calmly says the name of his master with a smile on his face. He won. Raising the head of the monster that he chopped off, he looks at it with joy in his eyes and tells the teacher that he killed this damn monster with his own hands. But after Lart said what he had done, he began to fall from powerlessness, but Taser hurried to run up to his student and help him. The teacher catches an exhausted young man who needs rest and resuscitation, and while he is unconscious, the man will help him and patch him up. Taser thinks that now all the hardest things are over for Lart, looking at his face, which was finally filled with calm. Filled with pride towards his student, Taser thinks that he is sure that he has accomplished a true feat, and Lart is the real hero of this island. But distracted from good thoughts about how the teacher is happy for his student, his attention is attracted by something located on his right side. The Taser turns his head to the severed head of the monster Nathan lying nearby, from which a bright blue light bursts out. The man does not understand what it is. Saying out loud in surprise at what he sees, on the forehead of the severed head of a strong monster, something shines with a bright blue light, as if it were a pillar. Not believing the veracity of what his eye sees, Taser approaches and grabs the head of the defeated monster from which a strange light emanates. Having picked it up, the man, with a sharp movement, seems to break the skull bones of a dead monster, taking out that very luminous thing from him. Along with the blood of the deceased, between the fingers of the mentor there appears a strange-looking blue oblong crystal, from which a bright glow came. Looking at this object in his hand, he cannot believe that he really sees what he sees. Obvious shock mixed with a certain joy is visible on his face. This crystal is called the head sapphire. Based on the name, it is located in the head, and its probability is negligible, which makes it valuable. Taser still cannot believe and understand how this is possible, because if you remember his adventures, in search of this rare mineral, everything was in vain. Having laid the guy on his knees, the teacher was already beginning to think that this crystal was a myth. But how did the guy manage to get the sapphire he so desired in the first battle? Still in a state of shock, the man decides to test what appears on his eye using the level check technique. Looking at the hand of his follower, he understands that Lart has already risen to the gamma level and is not standing still, moving like a flag in the wind. This is truly incredible luck, because this is truly a high level, and this once again proves the correctness and accuracy of the prophecies of Venus. Remembering why Taser started all this, he believes in the correctness of the words of the one he trusts, because all the prophecies came true one after another without mistakes. At that moment, while the teacher put the exhausted guy on his lap, he looks like a little child who has peacefully fallen asleep on his bed and is sleeping. Lart's card has changed, realization S remains, but now his level is Gamma, and the aura is a kind of heavenly luck, giving good luck in travel. The next day, a man is seen looking at one of the houses in the village, thinking that Lart's regeneration process is proceeding quite quickly. But looking at the empty bedspread and pillow, the man does not understand whether it is even possible to recover completely and be completely fine. The scorching sun shines on the village, empty of carnivores, brightening its surroundings, cleared of filth in the form of the carnivorous faction. Taser sees Lart standing on a small observation tower and looking into the distance, examining all the wildlife and territory of the island. Coming closer, the teacher asks the guy standing alone and looking into the distance what he is doing, because yesterday he was almost dead, and is already walking.